There I think we're at
Yeah. We fall. You're right, they're great photographs. Angela's makes an amazing photograph. I sent it to I'm not even. Well, I was gonna wait, I was waiting for, Judge Rowe, we'll wait about 5 minutes and see if she comes. I know, and it was a regular number. I was like, we are awesome that I. I was trying to figure out, is there a way to put it there?
Try to figure out what happened. It's on this both side on the see the passenger side. I don't think that white car was pulling out in front of Lincoln. But not right now. That's what I was thinking, but it's not, because I've seen that happen when it's car out there, but it's all damage on the. On the That's all. I feel like
I ended up always. That's what I usually. Okay. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started this morning. I'll call our funding program workshop meeting to order. Can I get the clerk, and we'll welcome our clerk back after that. It's going to be. So let's go with me. Thank you, and we'll go ahead and call the roll.
Member Andrew, member Cornell,
Yeah.
member March,
Yeah.
member Labarna,
Here.
member Ferrero, member Peterson,
Here.
member Snyder,
Here.
member Plumley,
Yeah.
Richard.
Here. All right, we have a forum here, we get the approval of our agenda.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the agenda, but I do have one question after the second.
Second by, Member Cornell.
My question, Madam Chair, I was hoping that we were gonna go to the different strategies that we use or the criteria that we use, not the strategy, but the criteria we use as measurables. And the reason for it is we're gonna do the RFPs. And I was hoping that by going through those measurables, which was recommended by Prismatic, that we can actually apply some of the objectives that we want to see, the measurables which we would like to see incorporated into in the RFPs. For instance, if we want to see, that something is addressed in the program and say, this is what we have concern about. Can you incorporate into your program that be a part of it? But it doesn't look like that's going to be part of the process again. And I think we're losing an opportunity.
Well, I guess you want to modify the agenda so we can talk, we want to add something to the agenda, so that after the programs by category, maybe you have one day. Talk about the measurables. I bought my thing, you recall what that is.
That is Marcia, help me what it's called.
Say that again, because I missed a little bit of
The
it.
things that we use, like the different, all babies, the state.
So the goals and then the strategy within each goal.
It was the measurables that was applied to us by one organization where it compares Roswell County to other counties as well as
The environmental scale.
those indicators. Because some of them were good, others maybe not so good. And some of them you could actually look at how we would like to see obesity.
The environmental
Yeah.
scale.
That's it.
The environmental scale.
Because I've used this as like previously about obesity and say in some of the after school programs or some of the whatever we could somehow incorporate, what are you doing as far as that? Do you like to see something? If your program is doing it great, if the program isn't doing it, maybe you can do some, do some extra outside activities or something where the kids can get some exercise. Something along those lines.
That's going to be very good. We don't need to program. Because they don't control it.
I think we should take a look at those indicators globally to see what we're funding globally, but I don't think the program by we're going to be able to.
I disagree. I think that there's certain people that we can do it. It doesn't have to be each program, but if there's a program where it looks like it could fit into it, that we see what you can do about it. I mean, you can always say, we would like to see this addressed and put an asterisk and say, if applicable. Because that's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be trying to move the needle on all these things. And if there's something that we see that could be incorporated in the program, we ought to see if we can get that in. And I agree.
Yeah, I think it's just hard for example, literacy program to also do.
And then in that case, we wouldn't apply. But most of them, most of them, you know, they incorporate like in that.
I mean, I don't have any problem looking at the indicators now, and that's the agenda. Really are. If we can.
So it sounds like you want to see the environmental scan, so we are gonna print that and we'll hand that out to everybody.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, we'll discuss more. I don't want to make a comment. So, all in favor of our agenda? Any public comment on our agenda? Before we walk in? Anyone all in favor of the agenda? And we're gonna add, some discussion around the environmental scan to it. The agenda that's all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. All right, so we have our programs by category. We're gonna have, I'm not sure how this is gonna go because I hadn't spoken with the ED, but not sure the staff going to present something or how.
Yeah. So Chris is gonna walk us through just a overall, as we go through talking about what we funded by age, so that you are aware, and we thought it would be helpful if we listed out programs for you. Then we're gonna discuss the contracts that we have that are multi-year versus the singular. And then that's when we'll shift into after school after this discussion. So Chrissy's gonna lead us off, and I'll turn it over to her. All right, give me 1 second while this loads. There it goes. So in front of you, you have the final version of the presentation for today's discussion. The goal of the first half of the presentation is to present our trust funded programs in a couple different ways. We'll start by looking at the information by goal, and everyone should be familiar with the slide. So in each month's board packet, fiscal provides an update to the program's award and expenses, and this is a similar format. Under each goal, it shows you the amount of funding that has been allocated. These amounts that you see here are what we are expecting as it relates to what the board has approved for cost of living cost of living adjustments, and the continuation increase process. I also want to bring your attention to some supporting documentation that we provided you all with. You all should have this document here with the green highlights. We will reference this document a couple times today, but for now, you can see how within this document, you can see how we were able to calculate the amount for each goal. If you see the gray highlighted area, that is to remind you what the board approved in preparation for fiscal year 23. So for goal 1, the board approved that the total allocation would be $1 million. Goal 2 was not increased at all, as we were already spending over $4 million under goal 2. And then goals 3 and 4 were approved for $1 million. The orange section that is under each goal is the total for the goal after the approval of cost of living adjustments, as well as making the 9-month contracts whole. So I just want to show you how we calculated that information. The green highlights we will discuss on a later slide. We also wanted to categorize our programs by age range. And what you have here in the next 2 slides is our birth to 5 category. And we have our maternal child health programs and 2 programs that we fund to address early learning quality. We continue with our book distribution, early detection and screening program, as well as our 2 new programs that we recently approved, the social emotional learning and the summer bridge for Head Start. The allocation for birth to 5 is about $1.5 million. We move on to the next two slides that identify our 6 to 18 programming. They range from after school to tutoring, mentoring, and safety. There are also mental health programming, health and wellness programming, and of course, summer and enrichment programming. And the total allocated for 6 to 18 is about $5.2 million. We also wanted to carve out space for those programs that provide services to both age groups, so birth to 18. And so there's about $450,000 for programs that are providing services to families and children, starting, as young as 2 all the way up to 18 years old.
Excuse me, Christie.
Yes.
Is there a reason why the 6 to 18 is a really large age bracket? And there's some of these, I would have preferred to see like an elementary and a middle, or an elementary and then a middle high for that movie kids, because it just seems 6 to 18, $5 million seems like a whole lot when there's some of these programs that are clearly for our older youth, and there's some. So is there a reason why you guys didn't try to delineate so that it would be a smaller bucket? It does seem that there's just an over concentration in one age group.
So some of our programs, when you think about our high school, specifically our high school programs, that's our teens work a lot.
Right.
Try to think if there are any additional that are specifically for high school.
Like the midnight basketball, I don't think that's just for younger students.
That you are correct.
So that's why, when I saw those two, I'm like, that,
Yeah.
to me, it makes one bucket looks like it's being overfunded or a larger allocation than what's happening. And it looks like the 0 to 5, we're only spending $1,595,000 or $1,600,000 on them. And then you got $5 million in this, and I think that's just distorting the total, but that's just, I'm just wondering why that breakout wasn't.
The largest funding amount are those that are summer camp and after school. Summer camp and after school is about a little over $3 million on its own. And that is going to be middle and high. The only ones that, and I think I would have to double check that for you, Madam Chair, is the Teams Workalacha and the midnight basketball that are specifically for 9th through 12.
Project Bill, whatever we're doing.
Project Bill, that is correct. But the largest amount, when you think about awards, is going to be that middle school area. But we can do that. We can go back and we can look and bring that back to you for sure to see if there is a equitable way to be able to split it elementary, middle, and high school.
Madam Chair, very rough math, 0 to 5 is about 21%. And I very rough, I rounded everything together. It was about the birth to 5 I calculated to be about 21%, and then the 6 to 18 is 71%. And if you just think about the buckets we had from the third to the 30-ish period in terms of ages, it is a little heavy on the 6 to 18, but not about 9% off what we would expect if you were following the 30, the 30 that the folks that did the listening tour kind of filled the buckets into. A little. It is less than you would expect at the 0 to 5, but in aggregate, the 6 to 18, you're right, you need to see it so that we know what we're doing in middle and high, but in total, it's not an unexpected figure for the elementary, middle, and high.
I guess like if someone didn't know what prismatic recommended,
Yeah.
or if you're just looking at it, you're just looking and you're saying, oh wow, those two we got just a whole lot. That's the reason why I'm just wondering why we did, since we know that there are programs that are targeted at the older students that they're not in the levels.
Can I ask one thing?
I'm sorry.
The really important years are maybe the ones that we should be concerned about between 1st and 3rd grade, because isn't one of our big goals to have children reading at grade level by 3rd? And if we're spending, I'm not saying we shouldn't spend money on middle schoolers, yes, we should. But maybe it is worthwhile to break it out to see what's happening after 8 to 5. To, are we calling it age 8 when children are in third? Yeah, I really don't know, but that, I think that's a really important group, and they usually don't go to summer camp, and we usually don't do after school activities. Am I wrong about that?
5 and 9, those are the ones that you already have.
Yes.
Can't sit home by themselves.
Okay.
So.
Okay, but that would be good to see with it. And then that might be a good place to make sure that literacy activities are in the RFA and kids get out and run in the playground. So that they don't come home from that, just probably wired for their poor parents or, you know, just saying, I've been there.
I agree with Chair Surton and Dr. Hart. I think if we could see the amount of funds that we're currently spending for 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, which is K through probably 4th, maybe 5th. And maybe the easiest way to do is to break down by elementary. I think that's a really important number. And if we have after school programming that's not providing after school programming for elementary, they're only starting middle, then perhaps we need to be asking them, look, we're focused on safety, we're focused on this, the metrics and they focus on literacy, and literacy is measured at 3rd grade, it's measured at, I think someone said pre-K, and so we can start to look at how funding those programs at those age groups are over time improving outcomes. And so I very much would like to see, after we have, I guess, a board discussion as to how much we're going to be spending in each category, which I would very much like to see what we're currently doing and how we can maybe shift some of that funding to those early figures. I think it's going to be hard. I don't know all the programs 0 to 5. I think the programming 0 to 5 is subsidizing or encouraging kind of what SWAG does over at the Early Learning Center, which is training the teachers, really training the childcare providers, and how do we provide targeted funding for those to provide enhanced childcare services and pre-K 0 through 4, 0 to 5. And I'd like to get into that discussion because I don't know the cost differential between providing that funding versus providing after school. That gets into kind of, you talked about intervention versus prevention, but I think really it's, I think it costs more, but I may be wrong. I think it costs more to fund the early age child enhanced services programs later after. But that's what I'd like us to get some discussion about that.
And again, we was talking about the environment, and last night I was looking at that, and I was also looking at some of the listening projects, and when you talked about that 3rd grade reading, one of the things the environmental scan put kind of in perspective is that incremental change at different key points in a younger person's life. And just the statistics I've written down, 57.5% utilize EPK. So that's 40% that's being left out for whatever reason. That's a huge amount that maybe aren't getting ready for school. And then 54.8% of kids were ready for kindergarten. Again, 54.8% of kids were geared as ready for kindergarten. 49.7% of 3rd graders were proficient readers. And then another statistic that kind of feeds into all of that, and this was K through 12, but 18.9% of children were considered to have chronic absenteeism, which is 21 days or more. Definitely impacts, their ability to learn. 18.9%. So if we start, again, one of the things we heard in the listening project was the importance of education, and where parents were feeling maybe some education was lacking. So we know that's an important criteria for parents. But then just looking at the environmental span, we've got some gaps here that we should be looking at. Okay, programs, how are you targeting some of this, and where can you make an impact? And I think we should be asking every program, especially when we get into the strategic plan, what is your collective impact on which of these areas, or whatever areas we decide are going to be our areas of focus, and then, you know, ask them how they're going to measure that. Is it qualitative, is it going quantitative, or is it both? I think these are, as a board, some things that we need to be doing.
I think to ask an after-school provider, I mean, they will get the child after they come back, but to impact absenteeism is a tall stretch. We have to make sure we're not asking programs to have an impact in an area that they don't have complete.
No, and I
School
think,
district.
yeah, I think on a lot of these, one provider only may impact one area of it. I'm not saying they would all impact everything. Absenteeism, I just see may have mental health components. It may have, you know, other things related to that. So,
I guess I'm asking us to be, I think we look at that and we see, but to be very cautious, because if something doesn't have an impact on a program we're funding, we don't see that indicator move. I don't want the board to say, we're putting money in an area that's not having any impact. Like, that's how I saw, that's the conclusion that I made when we first got our newborn home nursing visit. We were at the health department, and I was like, we spent a lot of money, and there were very few contacts with needed populations, right? And so I was like, well, is this the right spend? Are we making the right connection? And I hear everybody was like, oh, no, that's really important that we're seeing that we're making these contacts, because we're intervening and making impacts in maternal health. They could have postpartum issues and all that stuff like that. So I guess we have to make sure that the indicator is the program has control or direct impact on that indicator, and that we are really not attributing either a plus or negative movement in that indicator to, but you know, just we have to pursue.
and I think that's why I say we need to ask the program what area they in. Like, I wouldn't expect every program, I wouldn't expect the home visitor program to say that they can impact education. Not as far as a preschool, but I think we ask the programs what they impact, and even like when you use the home visiting program as an example, I remember when it first started, Wells Florida reached out to me and we compared SIDS deaths that DCF investigated to any of the families that had been part of the home visiting. None of them were part of that program and had a confirmed SIDS death. So while some of these indicators may not be part of what we're looking at, there are correlations that are happening that may be asking what was the impact of that.
Well, I think that makes clear the need to work with providers to understand what the root cause, and absenteeism is a great example. You can have lots of reasons, lots of drivers to absenteeism, why this child not go to school, and they could likely be different by age group. So I think that as we look at RFPs, we need to have an understanding of the problem we're trying to solve, so that we know, I can, to your point, Tina, that we're not expecting a program to touch something they have no impact, they can't have any impact on. So, but I think that requires an understanding of the problem and what drives it. Which has often been an assumption on a lot of programmatic planning departments. We assume this is what's causing that, so let's fund those, but it's not always correct.
I guess since I'm not making I haven't made any assumptions, right? Okay. I was just trying to get a good total, because I think with the programs that we have that we're funding, I thought that our staff, as part of the RFP, they have like a target age group. And I was just wondering if you had by 0 to 5, elementary, middle, and high, versus there just being two buckets, because we are funding programs that are clearly targeted at certain age groups, and that's what I'm trying to do.
So we can, Madam Chair, definitely bring that back to you at the next board meeting.
But do you think I hope we talk today about what percentages at the high level we want staff to think about with regards to, I think the difference there, 8 or 9, and then middle and high school. I hope we talk about, we have 7.3 million of programming. I think we probably have around 8 appreciation, 8 million. I hope we use that number and start to talk about percentages. I'm ready to do that today somehow.
And I had a question, because in terms of the amount, how much of the 7.3 that we've got under contract is using fund balance versus.
We get ready for that, Hank?
Staff, if you guys could pull that and we have that for later, I'm gonna ask you to get it to us now, but maybe someone, if you guys have that, if you could have that number, bring back to us later in the meeting.
Okay. The next few slides, again, it's an opportunity for the board to see where programming falls as it relates to early learning, out of school time and academic support, mental health programming that the trust is currently funding, mentoring program. I know that we approved $500,000 for our mentoring and character building mini grants. But the trust is also already funding mentoring through Big Brothers and Big Sisters, the maternal child health, as well as physical health programming, family resources and support, and then programming for violence prevention and safety. The board has started having those conversations about funding for fiscal year 24. It's came up at the last meeting also. The three initiatives that you see here are the ones that are multi-year contracts that will continue funding for the next couple of years. So for an example, our summer camp and enrichment providers and teams work a module. Those are 3-year contracts. So they are operating this summer. They will receive funding next summer, and then our RFP will be released for the following year. And then Help Me Grow is a 5-year contract. These programs that you see here are about $3.1 million. And if you go back to your handout with the green highlights, the programs that are highlighted in green are the ones that are not on multi-year contracts. And so these are the ones that would funding would end if that is what the board this September. Depending on how you want to implement your new strategies from the strategic plan and listening project. So the ones you see on the screen are multi-year. The ones highlighted in green are the ones that would funding within September of this fiscal year. And I will stop here and hand it over to Executive Director Kiner for any remaining discussion that the board would like to have as it relates to funding priorities, preparing for fiscal year 24, and our goals and strategies. Questions?
I just have a couple of things. As I'm thinking about this and listening to the conversation, and I don't know if this will be helpful or not, but I'm reminded about the conversations we've had around this balancing act between funded programs and systems change. And I think that when we talk about indicators like reading at 3rd grade level, that's a population-based statistic. And so what we want to be thinking about is then what do we want to invest in programs that will help us move the needle on what are the efforts and effects we want to have at the program level that will result in true systems change around those population-based indicators. So I think what I struggle with a lot is thinking about how each of these programs individually and collectively contribute to those population impacts, but where the gaps are. If that makes sense. And I think as we're thinking about, like last time you were mentioning, and I don't like this word, but zero-based budgeting, we certainly are not in a place to do that right now. But how do we do this balance between continuing to fund programs, which we want to do, we need to do, but also thinking about how we build in incentives for creating networks and collaborations that are so strong.
I totally agree with that. I think part of the challenge is that there is just at the base level of programmatic need that is so high that then to divert funds from that to this more system level change, is part of what we see as
That's the discussion. And so how do we do that in a
how do we both?
incremental way? And, you know, it's, to me, it's like thinking about your investment portfolio and how you're going to do it, right?
And we're talking about how much do I need to live on a day-to-day basis,
Right.
versus how long am I gonna live, and then
And
we
we've
need
got
to have.
people who are much better accountants and financial people on this board than I, but just trying to think about, it's just helpful for me because when I hear people say things like reading on grade level at third grade, we all know how complex that is. But just investing in early literacy and early learning without attention to social emotional foundations for early learning is not going to get us there. So I think we just have to think a little bit more broadly about what does result in productive third grade reading outcomes. And it's all related to everything we're seeing in the press too about the reading word thing that's back, right? And so we're going to use science-informed reading, you know, approaches. Of course we should be doing that, but we're still talking about this, right? And so anyway, as I think about this, it's like the big balancing act. And when we're talking about programs today, I think that's really important. But I also need to think about like, how do we create the networks that the after school folks are talking about that they wanted so badly, like Boost? How do we bring those things back? Thanks.
To Dr. Snyder's point, I think that what we could do that shouldn't take a real long time is to go through these quickly and see which one, you know, which one where we think that we could, where we can have an impact. You know, see what we feel is important. And which one of these indicators, and also I think Dr. Hart had some ideas about maybe tweaking some of the indicators. Or are there indicators on here that we have that aren't here that we think should be here? And I don't think we should, we should pretty much know right off the bat whether or not we think something in here we're capable of making a difference, and which ones is probably a larger scale issue that we might be part of the solution, but we're not, you know, the money we invest is not going to change the direction people have. So, Madam Chair, that's kind of what I think we're at the point where we need to have that discussion so that we can figure out, you know, where we spend the money, where we prioritize.
All right, thank you, thank you, sir. Joshua.
So I have such complex feelings. I 100% think that the issue of literacy by third grade is critical, but as Dr. Schneider pointed out, there are so many environmental things impacting children, and we can't expect children to do well in school if they're not sleeping at night, if they're not eating, if they've had trauma. So I'm torn. It's not as simple as let's see if they're reading 1 hour a day. I just don't think it's that simple. And I sit here and I almost feel heartsick because I just know what children are going through, and I want even children that are in homes that you would think they're having an okay time because we know that domestic violence goes through all families, that we know that sexual violence goes through all families. So I would like to see, as we look at these systematic changes and also the important things like making sure our kids are safe in the afternoon and after school program. I think that's a big part of it. There's so much and it's so complex, but I very much want to see programs that are able to look at, a child who's behaving badly may not be behaving badly because they're a bad kid, and may be behaving badly because something really horrible has happened to them. And so I just want to make sure that we have that. And I recognize that not everyone sees some of the things that I've seen, so I recognize that. But I do think that it's important that we really think about how to handle or how to impact children that have trauma and environmental stressors that would put a barrier to them learning how to read because they're not able to stay away from school or they're not getting to school or anything. So those are where that's the things I'm concerned about.
And those are the things that I was saying, when it's happening, an indicator, what's the underlying, there's poor, what's driving that, and it's, those things will all be determined in those cases.
Well, and that's what we're talking about, a network. You know, it's not just the educational piece, it's the emotional wellness piece, it's the lack of, you know, it's the parenting skills that are going on. I see the same thing you're talking about, and our abuse rates in Alachua County are not good comparatively to the state, so that is a huge additional target that may be impacted, you know, it's not one thing is the sole thing by a standalone by itself, they all in them. You know, we have to look at it. We talk about helping children thrive, and this is all part of helping children thrive.
Yeah, when you say that, I recall when I first started with United Way on their CIC, the Community Investment Committee. And programs we were evaluating were in the after-school space, right? But they were asking for funding, not just for after school, but they were asking for mental health. Or they were also stopped so the kids got to, so they were meeting a lot of needs, but they got in the category in the education so they provide tutoring. But am in girl spaces where I'm thinking of the children that we talked to when we did the site visit, we were there for brain power, but they were talking about the mental health component. One little girl, she's 8 years old, said she got to come to be a kid. So it is, these programs touch a whole lot. So I think it's going to be harder. And I don't think that, I guess my point will be that for us not to have a lens to say, if we can't solve the problem or that we make the biggest impact on the younger students. So that's what I hear. And I want to push back. I don't want to say I want to fight against that because I don't want to be accused of being violent. I already had my boy to say something. But I want to push back against us always just focusing on young, because we have children who come up through and live in our community for a number of years and they have issues and things that we want to be able to use the dollars that this tax district raises can impact the whole spectrum, because that's what the statute says. And that's what we went to the voters for. We didn't go to the voters and say we're only going to focus on our youngest students, our youngest children, 0 to 5, because that's the biggest impact. So I want us to have a thought that we can do both and that it not be a zero-sum game, that the age groups don't, that we just really try to look and make sure that we're investing in all of our children. And the older ones, I'm going to say that our community and the systems that are in place, quote unquote, kind of failed them. So now we got to attend to them, because as they transition out of childhood into adulthood, if we didn't try to change their course of their being and their life and impact them in a positive way, there's then going to be a cost on us as an adult in a lot of other ways. So we want to look at this environmental scan. I'm sorry,
Yeah, so Maggie, you had said earlier that the Literacy Project has made some recommendations that we actually fund by age group at the macro level, and then getting down, once we've determined kind of these buckets, now we focus in on what do we fund in each of the buckets? How do we make the most impact? And you said a third. Was it 0 to 5?
It was in that ballpark, but also the thing that I thought was crucial was also that not be the whole of the total programmatic funding, but only of a portion, so that each age group was guaranteed a minimum. But that there then could be additional funding set aside because there may be some things that are more priority than others. And I think that's really, that to me, that was really important, that out of that base amount for programs, it was not exactly a third, but it was somewhere.
It was, and it was really that there was kind of equity between the age groups, but then there was this other pot that was still available additionally that could then go in and target fund where a certain age group might need more. And so, but I'm just getting to that.
And another thing that was also in that was that I'm not hearing right now. It also said that there is an undercurrent of there may be, there's a thought about 0 to 5, and that was in the report. I'm not advocating, I'm just saying it was in the report that there might be more funding in that area. Because there is the train of thought that might be where the most impact could be. So it's a third plus here this other thought. So you might consider putting more money in there But it was more than just a third in that recommendation.
Well, I feel like that's where we have to kind of start and then talk, have all these other discussions. But I don't know what amount of funding they're talking about at different age groups. And a third plus more is more than 100%. That doesn't work in the math. So.
But she had divided it up, so whatever that base programmatic funding, it was a third, but not all of the programmatic funding.
Right, so what staff has presented to us is $7.3 million being spent, 400,000 is for 0 to 18, and then they've broken out 0 to 5, and they've broken out 6 to 18. I feel like we need to have some discussions about percentages at the top level and what we want to focus on staff direction on to bring us back some recommendations. But for me, when I read that, it's like not a third. It's like 30%, 30%, but that equals 90%, and then you have another 10%. So I think we need to kind of sort that out for staff, because staff is wanting direction so they can calculate like actual numbers. And then bring back, here's the pool of money that you all want to invest by age group. And here's the programs that you're committed to for the next 2 years. That's 2.86 million. And here's the amount that you're committed to for the next 3 years. That's 220,000. That leaves X number of dollars. I think it's about 4 million. I don't know. It's about that. And so then we have to decide how are we spending. Like, we have to kind of get past, we got to get there so they can tell us some recommendations of that 4 million. We are recommending, if you follow the strategic plan and the listing project, 30% 0 to 5, 30% 6 to 10 elementary, 30% high school. Let me just finish, I want you to kind of clear me up here, but if we don't get like those percentages now and direct them, then we're gonna have the same exact discussion in 3 weeks, and then you're shaking it. So I hope, like, can we do that? If we can do that, then we can get into, I think, environmental skin.
And I agree with that, and I think part of that it should be, so let's just keep going with this literacy, by able to read at grade level by 3rd grade, because now you're talking, 5 to 8 year olds, right? 3K to 8 year olds. So if we start to understand why they're not reading, then the mix in that age group, if that becomes the priority issue you want to tackle with that age group, that may still mean, as an indicator, that may be our key indicator, but that may still mean that we need to deal with hunger issues, housing stability. There are lots of things that fit in there that if we find 1 or 2 key indicators for an age group, the configuration of the buckets between the 4 goals may be very different. And what's that?
Well, we can tell our after school providers, we need you to focus on the general and this area, and this is how we can fund that area.
And how do you collaborate with each other rather than having a kid in 50 programs? I mean, one of the things that Judge Ferrero and Cheryl both can relate to is I have sat in many years of case plans being developed that had parents running willy-nilly and everywhere, and they never worked because there was no way they could do that. So I think what we need to do is create the network that addresses the need rather than the programs that we then send parents to 5 or 6 different programs to meet the need, when in fact what we need to do is figure out how to serve them better.
Well, I think we look at the difference between prevention services and intervention services, and we have to do both, but where will we systematically change Alachua County? Is it funding more this on the prevention side, or are we going to do the more intervention side where things are already gone wrong? How do we?
Because it depends on the priority of what you establish for each of those age groups.
So I want the prismatic report, and maybe I found it in the report, what they recommended. So I'll read that just to kind of level set towards if that's the direction we want to take, and I kind of like it. Says to address this, prismatic recommends the adoption of explicit annual funding goals for approximately half of the anticipated 8 million in tax receipts. Prenatal and birth to 4 years old, 1.3 million, 5 to 10 year olds, elementary school years, 1.3, 11 to 18 years old, middle and high school, 1.4. So they're saying 50% will go for those categories, but that's 4 million. And then, it said the remaining, skip the paragraph, the remaining available funding, program funding could be used to fill gaps in funding towards the trust for goals. This would mean that it could be possible, for example, programs serving 11 to 18-year-olds to ultimately receive more than 1 million in annual funding, but a floor of 1 million would be assured. And then they had some other things. So if we take the stance of having some buckets for each of the age groups as foundational, the half of the trust annual funding, and then we figure out what the other 50%, the other 4 million, how we allocate that. Then that gives some stability and funding to, I guess, stability.
And I think the thing that was missing for me is the then below each of those categories, it's really critical that we look at the 4 goal areas and how they interact. And she didn't say enough about that. I think in that report, they didn't say enough about that in that report. And so I want to make sure that we focus on a conversation around if we think that there's a specific set of issues in each of the age groups, then how do we wrap the 4 goal areas into these subsets of ages so that we know what we're really targeting. And I still, so the whole half of the annual still brings me back to my original question. So how much do we have after we pay for the admin and the overhead and all of that? How much do we actually have the programmatic funding that we see is likely to continue? May use fund balance to shore that up over time, but we need to understand that at some point that fund balance runs out and can't continue to be used operationally. So I just need to know what our baseline is without the fund balance.
One of the statistics that was also in the environmental scan was the breakdown of number of kids by age group. It was kind of a weird configuration that I know when we were in the steering committee, we talked about that a little bit, that 0 to 4 accounted for 26.7% of kids. 5 to 9-year-olds were 31.2% of kids. 10 to 14 was 25.6% of Alaska County kids, and then 15 to 17 accounted for 16.5%. Not that that means programs should only be implemented, percentage wise, but it just helps us kind of be where we have a base impact based on ages of the most kids. It's on page 3.
Or last 2% this year,
Which one was it?
10 to 14.
10 to 14 was 25.6%. And then 15 to 17 was 16.5.
You said that's on page 3 of this document right here?
Page 3 of the environmental scan. Was population statistics and development or demographics.
41, but to compare those to them. Just 5 to 9, 0 to 4 is
58.58%.
58.
You see those stats?
I figured them up, man. I had the numbers and I figured out the percentages, because if you have your total amount of children are 50,720. Since didn't mean that we have to go and say exactly what percent of those.
I mean, I was looking at this table and I was like, your numbers are, but now I see what they did. They did it to the population.
Yeah.
But basically, 60-40 is what you're saying on that. 58-42, 58-42.
For the, first 9 years is about 60%.
So I guess when Diana gets back, we can get out of about what's our programmatic number that we're showing? 6 million, is it 7 million, is it 7.5 million? Do you know that number?
I think that's where we started with the baseline of funding, and then if we choose to use fund balance, it's in that other bucket of extra gaps, so many innovation, piloting, whatever.
And aren't we exacerbating the conflict, between the ages? Shouldn't we just figure out the goals that we want and you figure out the goals and we will take care of what happens in different ages? Yeah.
I disagree with that, because I think that the struggles of each age group are different completely, and what is an important goal for one may not be at all an important goal for another age group right now, or not in the same way.
Maggie, I think you're looking at it too myopically in that the goals that we set should take care of each group. We should, as we go through and set our goals, each group should be taken care of. Like, because we're gonna constantly have this split. I mean, we're in charge of helping children 0 to 8. And I think, you know, these, we keep focusing on 0 to 5 or 6 to 18 or 6 to 10. And I think if we set a goal for reading, that takes place early to, you know, middle. And then, you know, one of the goals should be that we do what we can to see that there is no slippage in the children, which is going to take care of after school. You know, and we're going to have a conflict for a while, a few years anyway. We're going to have a conflict for a few years anyway, because we're having to deal with what hasn't happened in, you know, prior to the children's trust. So there's going to probably have to be, we have to consider that there may be more funding needed. Unfortunately, that won't happen later on in the older children, because, you know, we're trying to make up what didn't happen in the programs that we're trying to create now. So, you know, I think the goals that we set are going to be instrumental. And I think if we do the goals correctly, then we'll take care of the whole spectrum.
I'm sure. So we have a lot of citizens here. I have something that was set up by some citizens. So what I'm gonna say, if it's okay with you guys, that we take a little bit of citizen input. And then you all, will that give you guys a chance to look at this right here?
And Addison's here, so he can speak to.
So I'll call Addison up first, and then we're gonna take probably about 20 minutes or so of citizen input, and then we'll meet back together. So you'll come to the podium and you'll speak loudly and clearly. So that our people that you hear, people that might know.
Good morning, board. I just handed out a document that was actually given out during the early stages of CTAC, before I think an executive director had ever been hired. So we find ourselves at a similar discussion many years later. And so this data actually came from the YDRPP report that was hired by the trust to do a number of reports. So those I'm sure some of you are familiar with, but it does break it down by age. And these are from census data from years and years ago, so it's probably not accurate from the most recent census data, but you can imagine the percentages can't be off by too much. But the point being is that this was something that was proposed with updated numbers. As you can see, 29% of 0 to 18 is roughly 29% of the children. And if you took, say, 3 million, that's 37%. So that would fall in line with your 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 approach, with a little more going to 0 to 5 and then splitting it up, you know, elementary age, middle and high school age. So, and then you have your 1.5 over here that could, and you guys were talking about the 10%. What could we do with the 10%? This is an opportunity where you could fund professional development, the boost kind of type of activities, and more services that would go across all boards, professional development opportunities, trainings that could go for any youth worker. So I just wanted to make sure that we were all reminded, and I do have some boost handouts and stuff, just since it has been mentioned, but I want to bring us back to a conversation that we have had many times before with some of the original board members that have been on here of different age brackets. And I just wanted to make sure everybody knows where each age falls within. And then I think the other most important thing too is the preventative, developmental, treatment, and rehabilitative. I think that speaks to Lee's and everybody's point of we can move and mix and match, but I still think staying within these guidelines, to Ken's point, we have to start top down And so staff can be guided, because we also need to be getting to how much are we funding percentage of each organization's budget? I don't know if I hear enough of those discussions. Or a tiered system where, from an equitable lens, maybe organizations that are starting out get a higher percentage of their budget because they're just starting off, and maybe larger organizations get a smaller one. So tiered percentages of funding based on budget size, I think would be a wise discussion to have as well. Because to release these RFPs, we have to know a total amount that is allocated for it, and you cannot release RFP without that. And that is going to be holding this after school one up. And as we mentioned the timeline last time, the timelines right now, we're at a month between when if this was voted on and approved in May, we would be at a month between when we might have to fire key salaried staff or not, and kick out kids in our program because we don't have enough funding for their, and that is a real possibility right now. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good morning to you all. I'm Mark Phoenix. I'm with the North Phoenix Center for Peace Building. So I wanted to say that it's been, we've been in existence here for about 10 years. We started it because we wanted to have a community organization that dealt with all kinds of everything that was going on. But what really strikes me right now is for the past 8 years, we have been under contract with Broward Children's Services. That's huge. It's one of the first children's services. We have sent letters from the board. We've sent letters to you all explaining what they do in relation to what you were talking about, Dr. Snyder and many others about social emotional learning, about conflict resolution, about where does all this start? We can look at the world right now from our government, the US government, the entire world with great educations. And still that adversity, that conflict, that judgment, that human behavior is just what needs to be addressed. That is, to me, foundational to any kind of success. Because if we look at what's happening right now, we are not in the moment of success, not here, not there, not anywhere that I can see in the world where people feel safe, respected, heard, and that they matter. It's certainly our children is a great place to start. So in Broward, what they do is they take out of the budget money for that, for professional development of all of their different, I'm getting older, it's very hard to count them all. So all of their different, what are we, each of us here? Programs, yes, for each of the programs, rather than chart. And they instead have created funding, and they do the contracts directly with, in Broward's case, with us. So for 8 years, we've been under contract with them to do restorative practices, restorative justice, trauma-informed care, conversations with law enforcement and kids. And they set it up. Okay, so first for all the mental health people, they set it up for after school programs. They set it up with the Rockland County Sheriff's Department. They have restorative justice practices as a way to resolve conflicts and move on to start to understand not only other, but themselves, and trauma-informed and responsive care. So I want to say to you all, please consider that. Don't take out what you have, because everything you have right now, it's 30, 33 point whatever, is essential. But there has to be some kind of funding for the basic human behavior. I think all of us know that in our own homes, our own families, and the greatest marriages with the most wonderful children, very highly educated parents, we're still floundering, and it's a travesty. And the other part, and I'll get off, is that the age level, we have to meet us where we are. If we're teenagers, we deserve to know what we don't know. We deserve to learn how to resolve what's going on. We have kids being murdered in this town, in this beautiful, beautiful natural environment. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dorothy Thomas. First of all, for those of us in the back, I would beg you guys to please speak really loudly. We can only hear about 50% of what you guys say. So it's really hard for those of us who are here participating. As I was listening to everybody speak, I think Pat's comment resonated really in my head. As I was writing down notes, I was thinking about the process of how we got to here. And if you look at the things we're funding right now in the early world versus the older kids, I think a lot of it has to do with the history. And so what we're funding mostly in early education and early support right now deals with capacity and quality and building up the workforce. There's almost no early childhood stuff that is going directly to families or to kids. It's all about making sure that the early childhood centers are functional and that they're providing the right supports and that they've got all these things built into it. And then if you look at what we're providing for the older kids, most of that is programmatic. And I think that the reason that happened is because when we did the early funding, when we had the CSAB prior to having the Children's Trust, there were the collaborative RFPs and there was the system of trying to build capacities and building systems, and none of that was really about slots or adding programmatic funding. Whereas when the older kid funding started, that very first RFP was about trying to get money into the hands of providers to provide slots in after school and summer programs. So I think that's kind of where we ended up. And I think what we need to do is go back and think, what are the benefits of each of these different ways of funding? And so in the early world, maybe we need to think about how we can provide some additional direct services to families and kids, things like expanding ELC vouchers to, higher income levels, or there's a lot of different things that we could think about. And in the older kids area, then maybe that's where we need to really start thinking about bringing in some extra quality controls, some trauma-informed care, all of those kind of things that haven't been touched on. And then building both of these things in together. So you have quality programs, and in order to, access the funding for some of these slots, you have to buy into the quality building part to then access the slots. And I think that if you kind of find a way to tie, they would probably be separate RFPs, but the criteria for one may be linked to what you're participating in the other. And so I think that we need to find a way to build in some continuity between the different types of RFPs that we're doing. And that may mean that we cut a little funding here, we add a little funding here. I think all of the programs that are being funded are generally good programs on all ends of the spectrum. But I don't think we're doing anything to link those different parts together. And so when we talk about it, may not be a whole lot more dollars, it's just setting it up differently. So if you have an amazing, science program for 12-year-olds, great. But is there a way to link that to making sure you're participating in some sort of quality thing so that you know what to do if a kid comes to you and they've been abused and whatever? There's weird things that you can build together that don't naturally fit. And it's harder. But I think that when we talked about it back in the CSAB days, it was all about trying to mesh all of those things together. And it didn't work out perfectly. It's not easy, it's slow, it's cumbersome, whatever, but it really makes a big difference. And I think when you get to, I think Lee's point about not just saying 0 to 5 or 12 to 18 or whatever your age categories are, I think there's some things that these collaborative RFPs would span across everybody. If it's making sure all your providers are informed in trauma responsive care, that has no age bearing. And so some of the programs absolutely make sense to be targeted at a specific age, but some of the goals that you guys are trying to accomplish have no bearing on age. And so fine, if you want to do some buckets to make sure that every age gets some bucket, fine. But I think you've got to hit some of these bigger targets, whether it be, trauma or safety or literacy or whatever. I think some of those are going to have to be across the whole board, or we're going to keep having the same discussion that we've been having for what seems like forever now. And I think that by strategically weaving your RFPs together, I think you're gonna be able to maybe step out of those buckets a little bit. Not that I know how to do it, but I think like that's the concept. I mean, it's easy to say, make your RFPs all fit together, but it's really hard to do. But I think that that's the way we start to both fund programs and have those programs change systems if you link the two together. Thank you.
So, citizens, we have, actually, come on to the podium. When you hear that buzzer there, if you could wrap your comments up, we have our time people over there.
Hi, everybody. Leah Gallione, formerly Gainesville Bridge Literacy Program, just renamed as Peak Literacy, but the same exact program. I didn't know what Dorothy was going to say. I would just reiterate exactly her sentiment, and that there has to be some cohesiveness in programming and what we're doing. For us, we've had the same funding serving 15 kids when we first started to now 89 kids in Alachua County. So there's things just like the River Phoenix Center was saying, they obviously know what they're doing when it comes to, their specialty. What we're doing and the movement that we're seeing with the literacy program that we offer kids, all the way from kindergarten all the way to 18, we're seeing that move. So you have to look, in my opinion, you have to look at those things that are working. What things do we know that have data that are working? And those are the things that are incorporated into everything. So the after school care, going to ACEs in Motion and having those kids do the literacy program that we know works and moving the needle in those types of places, the River Phoenix Foundation or whoever it is that has those systems that are proven over time that work, and you incorporate all that into, what you're doing for kids. And I agree with Mr. Peterson, what he said about, it would be great. I hope that in 5 years, y'all don't need a literacy program because every kid is reading at grade level. That would be fantastic. But right now, we've got thousands of middle schoolers and high schoolers that cannot read. So what are we doing? We've got to, we can't just leave those kids behind. That we've got, and it's not just the reading, it's the social emotional, it's the food security, all those things. But there has to be a system of coming together where agencies are working together. And that's what I see the trust doing. And I encourage those decisions to be made that are really focusing on the whole child in each stage of development. And I commend you. You have a large task ahead of you, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
My name's Stacey Merritt. I'm with Partnership for Strong Families, and we are a program that's currently funded through the CTAC. So I had a couple of topics, but before I go over what I had kind of prepared ahead of time, just based on the agenda, I want to say, I think we're hearing a lot of common themes, and we're hearing it from individuals who have not necessarily talked before the meeting. I've heard it from the board and some of those that spoke before me. And some of those things are kind of just looking at the bigger picture, which is absolutely fantastic. I think that it's, for us, Partnership is a child welfare agency. So for us, it's really important to look at the importance of home and family stability as we look at being able to improve outcomes for children. I think all of the programs that we do that are direct services to children are absolutely amazing. They're very necessary. But if a child doesn't have a safe home to go to at the end of the day, then, they're going to continue to go backwards. They're going to continue to have struggles academically, behaviorally, and emotionally. So it's really important to look at the whole family. It's something that we do as part of our resource center model. And I really bring that up because, and again, glad to hear this today, because of the collaborative nature of what we do at the resource centers. We don't do it alone. We do it as part of a community. There are a lot of our partners that are here today, so that's nice to see. And we couldn't do it by ourselves, but as I think about it and as I've listened to the other conversations, I'm wondering at some point the trust, because there are a lot of agencies that are seeking funding. There are programs that are existing that we may not all know a lot about the other programs. You guys may end up becoming those experts and be able to help make some of those connections for us. So I just really want to say, I hope that you'll not only consider, expanding funding for the provision and sustainability of family support programs, such as our own and the others that I've seen on the list of programs, but also recognizing that need for collaboration between existing trust programs and those that could, so that we can potentially act as a continuum of care for children and families. So that was kind of my first point. And then also, as I look at the multi-year contracts, and I'm not sure if the list that up there is, those are the only ones that are being considered. So it may be that this is something you're already considering, but I just wanted to say I would strongly encourage the board to consider multi-year contracts, especially for well-established agencies and for new programs that are using evidence-based practices, because I think there's already some promise of what's going to happen with those programs. I think that additional considerations for multi-year contracts should include the agency's history and reputation within the community, the anticipated impact of the program on local children and families, the quality of the program design, and that would be evidenced by the proposal, and then the capacity of the funded agency to support and manage the program successfully. And then I know I need to wrap up, so I won't read this. I'll just say that when we're funded for a year, it really impacts our ability to hire quality staff. I think especially that first year. First year we rolled out our program, we were at the end of the year and we had been 6 months trying to hire. So there was no way we would be able to demonstrate our outcomes. And then as you near the end of a funding cycle, which is 6 years, it's really hard to hire quality and well-matched staff for those programs, which impacts the ability for those programs to provide quality services and really do what they're able to do. So thank you very much.
Good morning, board. I'm Ann Turbo, board president, ACES in Motion. And I'm not going to repeat what everybody said because I agree with almost everything everybody just said from the citizen point of view. I will add though that, if we keep doing what we've been doing, it will get better. I've looked at data since 2014-15 school year and nothing has changed. It's only gotten worse. The disparities have gotten worse, et cetera. Now, there are things happening in the school district with actually paying attention to the science of reading and hoping that, and doing a systemic approach, which may improve things, so there are things that are happening, but so far we just don't see the fruit of that work. I will say also that sometimes as an after school provider, if we aren't working closely with the school district, it isn't as efficient, good use of time. So we can talk about networking with each other, but I think we also have to talk about improving our relationship with the school district so we can work together. So summertime, these summer camps and stuff, great, but if we have a focus to literacy, if you guys are going to decide, oh, well, we need to help kids read better because they're going to behave better, they're going to have a better outcome after they graduate from high school, then we have to say, well, how are we going to work with the school district over the summer to do this better? And what are the indicators? Is there going to be less summer reading loss or whatever it is, learning loss, I should say? Are we improving something? We have to be accountable with this money. And sometimes I don't think we are. I will say also, I really appreciate what Dorothy Thomas said, but I do think that there are resources that are available. It may not be in this community, but they are nationally available to help us with these multi-system approaches to work less in silos. And one of them is the Forum for Youth Investment. I think Addison's talked about it. I've talked about it. And they have a technical assistance center where one of the things is cross-systems consulting. It just provides consultation, training, and technical assistance to systems leaders using a positive youth development approach to systems change to co-design innovative solutions for scale. We really need to go outside our community, and it's not that our staff doesn't necessarily have that. We wouldn't expect our staff to have that expertise, but the expertise is out there.
And we have UF, we have a national network that can help us. Even in Florida, Primetime is working with, has worked for years with the Forum for Youth Investment, the Wyford Center, to do better with a systematic approach to changing systems, which I have been talking about for many years now, right, Ken? Thank you very much.
Yeah. We're talking about it a long time.
Good morning, I'm Christy Arrington with Girls Place. I think there's two significant things occurring here. I think there's a funding conversation, but then there's also the work of the steering committee. And so what I'm really worried about is that we are going to negate all the work that Nikki and Beth poured into us as a steering committee by jumping ahead to indicators and goals when we haven't done that work as a steering committee. And so I'm an advocate for giving clear direction to our team at Children's Trust, but also not negating the work that we're doing on the steering committee because again, we are financially investing in Vashon and Nikki to guide us through this process to make sure that we are getting to the best place possible for our community. So again, I think those are two very different conversations, and I don't want you to put the cart before the horse.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, Candace King. I've been working in the health sector in my working years, but I also serve on the steering committee as Christy does. So I have 3 points, and I'm just putting this out here as a person that's been keeping track. The first is out of the listening project recommendations, one of the things that I thought was very valuable from their conclusions is to beware of using population statistics. And I know, Pat, you brought this up, but I think that's extremely important that what essentially they said, and I agree with, is that this group, your funding, are not going to turn those numbers. It's a system. You're not going to see an impact like that. Having said that, that doesn't mean that you can't look at indicators and statistics about how you control your money. So the information that you all brought up, talkers about evaluation, about providing support for the providers, about overlaying systems, about mental health, kind of things that Dorothy was talking about. I think that those are things that you can have measures about in terms of indicators that you track. Well, pretty much that's it. I did want to emphasize that I agree with Dorothy and many others that there's the opportunity to push into the programs that you fund, the education programming, and things like inserting health into some programs, inserting health into the schools. You can do that if you're clever, and you all are clever. So I do think that this interweaving is very important, as everybody else has said.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm James Lawrence from Gainesville for All, and I'm only going to take just a few seconds. I just want to make it clear that Gainesville for All, we stand ready to collaborate, to partner, to network, to work with the community and the providers in this community. I think there may be some misguided notion that we're not. That is simply not the case. As we prepare to launch, we hope to open in June, our soft launch. And so we've been very, very busy in trying to get that accomplished. So please understand that we stand ready to work with the community. Thank you.
Seeing no one else standing up, I'll bring it back to the board now. See my colleague over here to my right has a little chart.
I'm just taking notes. So, I mean, I don't know if we're ready to talk about funding yet, to Chris's point. But I quite like what Addison presented. And I also think we could kind of come up with some big numbers to direct staff, if that's the will of the board. If you look at, I guess, the programmatic funding that Addison sheet provided, 3 million, 3.5 million, 1.5 million. 6.5 million of programmatic funding is probably about the right number. not knowing what we're using for fund balance. And if you were to just make some basic allocations of early childhood to elementary school, I think we could say for early childhood to elementary school, 4 million, would take 1 million of that 3.5. And for pre-adolescent and high school, 2.5 million. That also kind of lines up with what Tina, you presented earlier on the 1.4 and 1. And that would basically say from 0 to 5th grade, 4 million, from 6th grade to 18, 2.5 million. That would leave us another 1.5 million for other stuff to bring in many of the comments I heard with regards to making sure that our RFPs are collaborative. And that would be a place where I would start. I do want to mention what Addison said about tiering and funding nonprofits. At the county, what we do, and I think this could be something that we look at, is in our CAP program, we have kind of 3 different types of organizations. We have established organizations that have a budget of $1 million or more, and they can't receive more than 10% of their budgetary funding through CAP. We have mid-sized organizations, nonprofit that we classify. I think it's 250 to $1 million. And we ramp that percentage up. We can't fund more than 20% of their budget. And then we have new organizations that are 0 to 100,000 in budget, and we don't fund more than 30%. So we increase that percentage based on the size of the organization. That has worked well for the county. We might want to think about something like that here in the RFP. Those are my finished comments. And that will run one more point. And I think if we decide on that type of funding, I think it would have to be phased in. I think over the course of the next 3 years, because if you look at what we're committed to, in the next 2 years, we have $2.8 million, and most of that is the older kids. So I don't want to take that money. I don't want to cancel the contracts. But I think that could be kind of a goal that we could build on.
Thank you.
Another thing to say.
What Ken just said is, it's the 4 plus 2.5, it's at 6.5 plus 1.5, that's 8 million, and we should get, what about, a little under 9 million this year, if the property appraisers thing is correct. So staff and operating is about 1.5, so correct?
Yeah, higher than that, it's any position than any color.
One was 3.
Does that include everything, all your overhead?
That's
That's payroll. It needs to be everything that's not programmed.
that is.
That's good. Good on this, it should be. Watch, keep doing that. Now there are certain programs on here that are going to cover, hunger. That covers the whole spectrum. We're going to set aside, I guess that would be a certain amount that's going to transcend all ages.
Right now, 400, I would say we make that happen.
Let's see, we have Savings Smile and Resource Center, the Child Advocacy Center, and it says under the backpack, and that's given to 0 to 18. I think that should be, you can figure out how we can do that from 0 to 18. Put that in the 0 to 6 to 18. I don't think it should be. It's done in the school, and I'm sure that's why they thought there. But we need there are certain things that we need to do, medical, hunger, and we need to decide those categories and then put money towards that, and then we work on the money that's left.
So I like a measure of what Member Cornell and what you're saying here, and the phasing in over, it's gonna have to be 3 years because we have the contracts that are there. I do think the medical tech, the saving smiles and all that stuff are key. And they do, I don't know how many older students that their children there dealing with saving smiles, but I do know dental issues are pervasive in our children. So we figure out how they were out of shape now, probably some of what's going to each of the buckets in by age group to be able to find that. So it's there.
And so I think if we get, I want to make sure, I guess the question for me now is, are the programs that serve all age groups not included in what you gave us? So the programs that serve all ages is double counted in the 0 to 5 and 6 to 18. It's pulled out. It's pulled out.
So saving smiles. Yeah.
The one that's not in there now is we need to figure out what we want to do as far as hunger. Because that's allocated, and that's just one program, and I know that it's probably very helpful, but is that all we're going to do with hunger? We need to allocate a certain amount of money for, you know, the kids. It's food insecurity.
Yeah.
And as far as housing, I know housing is a terrible issue. I just don't think that housing is going to be in our purview. But I think medical and food is definitely something that we can play a role in.
I don't know that, again, I'm mindful of the comment that was made about don't get ahead the steering committee in terms of specific indicators to target. Which is why I think broader goal, you know, are there some gaps that we know are so critical that we know they're going to be part of it?
Good health.
Yeah, I want, let me talk about health in a minute, because that's like this. That's like world peace. I want to make sure that we think about having enough resources and addressing Addison's concern about, we need something, we need to know what's happening for the stuff we got to fund and get going next. And I think that's our priority today. And I think going forward, we've got to wait for the results of the steering committee to decide on specific indicators and what those gap indicators may be. I think the area of mental health, everybody wants mental health. And you know, every time there's an adverse incident in the community, it's all about mental health. Mental health is not one thing. You know, mental health is resiliency building, mental health is prevention, mental health is social emotional development, mental health is therapy, mental health is rehab. And so we talk about this as if it was a single thing, and it is not. And so to me, it's not helpful to think we need mental health. I think to me, what's helpful is to understand what we need. Is it 0 to 5 needs a lot of social emotional development and some trauma informed centers that can recognize when they're dealing with the child's behavior that may be trauma related. That's very different than providing the treatment for the trauma. And so I think we need to be very, very careful when we use that language to be very specific about what level of care are we talking about, and what kind of service are we talking about, what kind of program, and how much of it can effectively be built in. You can do a lot of built-in resiliency, social emotional development, trauma-informed approaches to managing discipline within an after-school program. You're not going to do intensive psychotherapy in that program or a lot of family therapy in that program. You're going to do it all the time. You don't have the kids for enough hours during the week to do that. So I think we just need to be very careful about that later.
What my point was, should that be a zero? There should be a certain amount from 0 to 18, as well as built into others. I mean, that's.
Again, I think it's enough of a gap that we may want to say set aside some funding for that as a second category. That's understanding that it could be setting aside funding for a lot of different things within a big bucket.
I just want to thank the community for coming in and giving us some really good thoughts, because although no one used my favorite term, which is meta programming, I think 3 or 4 different people touched on it, and it gets to what Maggie's concern is, that mental health is world peace. But I thought, a couple of people made a point in part rather eloquently, so that, we could teach everyone in this community that touches children how to recognize traumatized children and how to do it. I think that is elemental. And I've brought it up so many times. You are sick of me. I need to hire Hart to come to the podium and talk about it every time. But we have to do that. Everybody needs to be on the same page about what we're talking about traumatized children and how to recognize them and what to do about it. And if we could help our providers prevent re-traumatizing children or traumatizing them primarily just because they know what orchid children interpret as trauma. So anyway, that's that. I don't care which bucket that goes in. It would certainly work for 0 to 18. And we could have a very clever RFP out there, because I know that there are providers in our community who would not only apply for it, but they would hold hands and sing Kumbaya and probably give us better ideas to make it system-wide than we can even come up with. So that to me is an RFA development thing. And I don't know if that steps on our planner's toes, Cheryl Plumley. But that's kind of where I'm hoping that we will go with our strategic plan and all of our advice that we're getting.
Well, and I had some of the concern when I knew we were gonna have this discussion today versus our strategic plan that's still in the works. And to make budget decisions now that we don't even know what our direction or our final direction is going to be, seemed a little hasty. I don't know I know the goal when we started the whole listening project and everything is we were going to have a strategic plan that we could put in place for next funding year. Maybe that's a discussion we need to have is, do we need to, because I know there's a lot of concern with the providers that if you take away my money right now, I'm not prepared for that yet. And it may be that we need to look at the strategic plan to do that longer term mission of how we move forward, take into account that maybe we can't take money away from every person that doesn't fit the end of the new strategic plan yet. And maybe that will be the next year. And then we say to these providers, get ready for this because this is the direction we're going based on the strategic plan we've developed, and start thinking of how you can work into what our goals are.
Or maybe the only funding decision we can make today is what's an immediate decision that needs to be made, because RFPs are there and providers. We already said we have to do this incrementally because we have 3-year commitments and 5-year commitment. So what is it that is an immediate risk? Addison will tell you right off. It's the after school RFP. So if that's what we need to focus on here.
And Christy is with saying in my ear, it's every program because they all end in September. Many of them do, but I think what I heard board member Cornell say was if we took a phase approach, then we would be able to get a strategic plan, be able to incorporate the strategic plan as we move forward with the folks who will be upcoming. So I think there's a path forward here that doesn't throw everything up in the air and disrupt us. It gets us headed in the direction that everybody wants us to head in, if we are allowed to do that.
I'm gonna look at that.
The only thing I would add is, we know that we have this RFP coming up, and are there certain things that we would like to see incorporated into it, which makes it a little bit, we are getting into some of but there are certain things I think that we all recognize are important, and no matter what the strategic plan, we know it's going to be in there. So I think that I can end up being happy leaving if we do some of that today. We may not have everything in there, but at least we can always put the caveat is our expectation may change on a yearly basis. It's like some of the funding thing changes it, for cost of living and whatnot. We may come back and say we'd like to see further plans.
And after school is an annual contract. So
yeah.
you could do that.
And it thinks that we could add something to the agreements this year that said, asks the provider to identify other areas within our goal structure that they would feel like they could expand into if additional funding became available after the strategic plan is agreed upon. So understanding that if we're going to ask you to now tackle some other things or do some other collaborative efforts, you might need to get more than you're getting now to do it. But are you willing, and what areas do you think you could also expand into and have that be part of their response would at least begin to get us some idea of what capacity there might be if funding were made available for some broader, integrated, more collaborative approach.
But can I respond to Maggie? I think you're right, but I think what the language in the RFA should say, we're not going to expect you to do this. No, we're going to expect you to accommodate a third party who we're going to.
And that may be the way
to come to your program and provide it. So if we could just have that, some language like that in the RFA saying, we're going to ask you to give time to a selected program or agency or whatever. And that would give Cheryl's group all the flexibility to figure out what those are going to look like. But at least our providers would know they're going to have to give some.
Right, and it gets to that whole meta, we're gonna.
The meta.
Just what you, we're about more than just this.
And changing our whole community that way, just making everybody aware of whatever these selected things are.
Finish. Adjourn. We all in there? All right. So staff, y'all, I think you've heard from the board where we have given you direction and heard what we're thinking about delineation of funds by age groups. So phase it into that so that the RFP can go out for the one that everybody's expecting.
So we have a presentation for after school. We haven't discussed that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We have a whole
We got 45 minutes. Take a break, take a 5 seconds.
That's over there.
Yes.
Place we that has to at times certain. And I'm not sure that he has to leave. I'm saying, I'm just free to let it shoulder, don't get it shoulder. But you have to leave it or her, he doesn't start at 11:30. So
I believe it starts at 11.
that moves about 11:15. So call us back together. Here, Judge Farrar, do you have to be at your place at 11:30 or?
I have to be at here at 11:30. I have to be here by 11:02 to get there. 11:15 doesn't wait. Okay. Okay. All right, you can do it.
All right, so just kind of to wrap up the earlier discussion, let's see if I can summarize that. I think the consensus of the board, we agree with the concept from Prismatic, we're listening to our folks of that we would have funding allocated in buckets by age group. And if I'm going to summarize, I think we would want to kind of agree upon with the recommendation of the fund out early from 0 to 5 in elementary school, allocating around $4 million, in middle and high about 2.5, and other 1.5. And we understand with the understanding that some of those tools aren't hard and fast, but that concept is what we're going to embrace, and they will have to be phased in over a couple of years because of existing contracts that we have right now. Did I gather that? And then that there's also the conclusion that the RFA that goes out, RFQ that goes out, that there will be language in that to encompass the meta programming concept, whereby third party may push in for programs to train or incorporate tenets or principles that run through all the age spectrum. And did I summarize that correctly?
So Madam Chair,
Yes.
we had some providers in the room who are a little, would still like clarity about their programs for this fall.
So I thought that we were doing this so that an RFA could go out and there would in a timely manner so that they could make decisions. I'm not understanding.
One of the things that I heard was confusion around, was it just the after school programs that we're talking about? Because there are a number of other programs that expired September 30th. Are we talking about all the programs, RFAs for all of the existing programs. So it sounds like we're recommending continuing the, after school or out of school ones, but there are a number of others that are not in that, look at the list of green.
Correct.
There are programs that are not, that are also due to expire September 30. Are we kind of just gonna do the same approach for all of them for right now until we get our, or are we letting those expire? That's that. You can nod at if I got that confusion correct from folks from the,
That's John, I hope that you go ahead and, you know, the RFP process is the ones that I've been dealt with from the commission. You know, there was a time certain. I do not think, I emphatically do not think that we should, not honor the ones that we've committed to. However, the ones that said it was going to expire, we can get the ball rolling. And I would say that we don't want to, you know, they will be under the new RFP that we're going to create.
all of these are after school, they're all expiring, they're not the ones that were already committed. I mean, they're.
The only,
So there's after school, presentation, yes, Chris.
So Madam Chair, the presentation is specifically for after school. Because after school needs to be released immediately to prepare for the next school year. The programs that are highlighted here green are programs whose funding is due to end September 30. Those, if they would have to either be funded exactly how they are now, or based on our strategic plan and what our funding priorities are, the trust would release additional RFPs based on what comes out of our recommendations for the listening project, and what the board decides to fund through the strategic plan. So what the providers are trying to understand is our funding ending September 30, and we need to be prepared for RFPs whenever they are released? Or is the board going to fund us again and phase in whatever the funding priorities are?
So. What I'm looking at, if you have this funding ending September 30, then you issue this, and then you have to score these as well as score the after school. I'm wondering if the staff has the bandwidth to do all of that.
Well, we couldn't release an RFP anyway, other than for after school, because we have to determine what our funding priorities are. What are the recommendations? And so.
But if we decided upon the funding priorities,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
you have after school and these other programs, you all able to handle both of those RFPs at one time? I see this.
It wouldn't be a phase approach. It would be a phase. Yeah, it would not be.
The priority is, if I understood what you said, the after school is the most immediate and urgent
Right.
that they have, because school starts. Right,
Yeah.
and they need to know whether they're gonna, but the others aren't as urgent. But you should note that those RFPs is not as urgent because the timing is different in terms of when they would start back up. So the after school providers are gonna start in August, right? And so they don't want to just do 3 months of after school, they kind of have to have some understanding. But the other programs may not need to have an RFP issued, I mean, you'd have to issue a pretty close time,
Yeah.
but they wouldn't be at the same time, is what I'm hearing.
So it would not be at the
They're
same
not the same time, but I think they're gonna budget, and the work is gonna kind of overlap, and I'm wondering if they're gonna have the bandwidth to do all that. That's what I'm thinking, but.
Which is why I said it would have to be a phased approach. We can't release, multiple RFPs at one time, because no, we don't have the bandwidth for that. But we also, if you say, okay, I want to fund more early learning, there's some time that goes into research and making sure all the necessary information that we need to come back and present to the board for that. So no, they wouldn't be all released at the same time, even if you made decisions right this moment on what areas you want to fund. There would have to be a phased approach for every priority area that this board is interested in funding.
Okay, so anything that's not after school, you all are in agreement with taking the recommendation from staff to do a phased approach for those, even those contracts in September 30th. Is that where you are landing?
But then, yeah, I don't think that was, I wasn't making a recommendation. The providers need to understand whether they are gonna be funded the way they are again come October 1. Or if their funding is ending September 30 and they will need to wait until the trust releases funding in the future for different priority areas.
So are you saying there may be a lapse in your funding?
There will be a lapse in funding, and we absolutely.
Okay,
So,
and that would be for the non after school.
The green.
for everything that is green.
I am, for me, I would prefer to extend it 1 year. Because that is just a hard sell to put on someone in a program that is looking to us, and looking for us for funding. So I would lean towards extending it for 1 year. Until
So I think what you were looking for was a recommendation from us, and that is the recommendation. That we don't put our providers in a lurch, right? That we give them time. They now know that this is coming for next year. We know that we will be working on and have a finalized strategic plan that is going to inform everything moving forward. So that would be our recommendation, because you're right, Madam Chair. I think that would be a lot to put on staff, understanding that we also have the mini grants. Staff is going to be stretched with summer. I haven't even been here, but I already know it's going to be a hectic summer for us. So.
Well, and I agree with that, and I think it gives all these programs a year to get prepared for the direction that we're moving to the strategic plan. My one follow-up question is, what about programs that are not currently funded that may have thought they would be able to pursue funding? Or they won't, there will be nothing released that they can, like everybody we're funding now, will just be in place.
And I'm still in my question of how much of our 7 point is fund balance, because if we keep the exact same budget, we are again tapping fund balance to pay for that. This decision has two consequences. One is, you're right, there's no new money for anything else unless we yet again go to fund balance, which, you know.
Right.
And we have exactly the same budget. So we're continuing to tap fund balance. We have no new initiatives. If this is what we did. I just want to make sure we all understand that.
Or is there a middle ground where we could reduce the amount of funding that some of the providers would be receiving? I mean, I would say that, but.
Or do we do a 6-month contract? Do we do a 6-month contract, automatic contract? In anticipation of that, and that gives us at least some flexibility for the second half of this year.
I didn't hear what you said, Commissioner. 6 months. Yeah.
6 month continuation.
6 month continuation.
Not for the after school, I think we already have a contract, but for the others, a 6 month while we re-up and decide what our priorities are going to be and how you incorporate some of these other initiatives.
Is that enough time?
Yeah.
So that would make everybody till about March 2025.
And then what do they do from March to September?
So there's a 6 month
with the
RFP will come out.
Right, there would be funding opportunity.
A new RFP would come out in March.
Ahead of time, so that you would know what.
So we would be able to apply for March of the following year.
Based on the board approved priorities.
Yeah.
And then that would open up to other entities who may
Yes.
move forward. Yes, so it would keep everybody afloat for 6 months, but it would also allow those that are interested to know they only have to delay applying for another 6 months, and that may be fair.
And not a complicated issue, but after that next contract should be a year and a half. That way you'd be on.
To get everybody.
Right, that.
Right.
And we're still talking about having the RFP.
Right, this is separate from after school.
I know. No, I'm saying, but to answer the question for the audience, we're still talking, we're not talking about sending out the RFP in March, we're still gonna have to come out sometime in the summer
So they have time, September too soon, we decided, right? September too soon, so March.
Right, so somewhere between that,
Yes.
yeah, would be when the RFP would then come out with the new priorities and everybody would have the opportunity to see how they fit in or how they can partner to fit in.
This addresses the point that they can't be ready by September if we send it out in the summer.
Right.
And y'all will have no time.
So it depends on what the priorities are, how much, we don't have a safe of already created RFPs because we don't know what the priorities are. We have our sister CSCs that do things similar that we can consult. We also have, additional information, research that we do, other consultants. So there are not these ready-made RFPs that are filed away. So it depends. I can't, if you say, are you gonna have this one ready by, well, depends on what the priority is and what you want us to fund.
On the worst case scenario, you have to call the parent and say, can we just extend it for a year?
Scenario, we're not really interested to issue RFP, we said we can come back and say extend it for a year. So we started 6 months.
Worst case scenario, yeah.
I think we also, once we get the millage number in and we actually know the budget, hopefully there'll be just funding. And people can think about there are new programs out there that we have an opportunity to look at. Give us the flexibility of looking. I hate to, we've been talking to lots of groups over the last year, some of them could fit right into our plan and just say nothing new for another year and a half.
Well, that's why I think that 6 months gives us the opportunity to both find out how much money we're gonna have and.
Yes.
How much of a amount we're gonna spend, right?
All right, so
6 months.
6 months. Come back here. All right.
Should be correct.
All right, our next item, after school RFP.
Yes. So just to kind of get us back on track and where we are. The next several slides are specifically for the board to discuss the RFP. What I provided for you in the slides is what currently guides our after-school programs. I believe there are 6. Looking at Believe It and Beyond. Okay, currently 6 after-school programs. And again, what you have is the requirements that are currently guiding them. So when we released the RFP for after schools, maybe about 2 years ago, because they are on their 2nd year of funding, even though they are annually, they are on their 2nd year of funding. The goal was to expand after school in our county and make sure that children had safe places and enriching programming to enroll in throughout our county and specifically for low-income families. This included families who had income up to 400% of the federal poverty level, families who had children with IEP or 504 plans, families receiving SNAP benefits, and then children in the foster care and kinship care programming. Points that staff would like the board to keep in mind is that, so we think about what we've already discussed. So do we want our after-school program to simply be, and I'm using simply broadly, simply be an opportunity to ensure children have somewhere to be after school, to ensure that it's a safe place after school, or do we want our after-school programming to address a certain need? Literacy. Because if we do, then this is our opportunity to, in an RFP, state that if receiving these dollars, if you are awarded an after-school funding from the trust, then you're going to address these following things using this curriculum, providing this data back, looking at these types of performance measures. So it kind of goes back to what are we holding them accountable for if that's not the type of program that we're funding. And so keep that in mind as we're making those decisions.
our literacy component could be, or our programs could have a literacy component that supports what's happening in our school system. So we have Madam Chair, who's on both boards, we have Superintendent Andrew, who is also on our board, and being intentional about the trust, having, you know, the school board meeting with BOCC, school board can also meet with the trust so that we can have these intentional conversations about how we partner and how we can support what the school system is doing, if that's the type of after school program that we want. We also can be thinking about special needs. That is a current goal. How do we want to incorporate special needs into the type of programming that we offer? And then something that we have noticed through our summer camps, when we look at families who have children with IEP and 504 plans, how do we want to address that? Because that looks many different ways. If our programming is for low-income families, then our families with 504 and IEP plans looks very different. Do we want to say IEP and 504 plus low-income families to ensure that's what we're doing? So those are some very specific conversations that internally we've been having and things that we want the board to consider also.
Chrissy, what are you doing?
In my who's our academic? There you go. I'll let her answer because I may give you the water down.
Or speak to our children. In toddlers, you've got special needs, and 504 plans are accommodations that are provided based on some type of enhanced, might be take a test or for students who might have learning challenges. That need it.
It's a hard one to bring this number of total, right? I'm trying to,
They're both
what
legislative. Pardon me?
What age is the child?
Well, IEP started at age 3, and then before that, there's a whole system of services called Part C of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is early intervention. And in Florida, that's the Early Steps program. You might hear people talk about the Early Steps program. And that's for infants and toddlers, and they have in their families. It has a very family focus, child focused, of course, but family focused philosophy. And instead of it being an individualized education program, it's called an individualized family services plan. Or in Florida, we call it actually an individualized family support.
So they're not considered special needs?
They are, absolutely. So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act covers children, infants, toddlers, children and youth from birth to 21.
But this is a subset of just a general special needs.
Thank you. I'm yes, I'm hoping. If that's all.
I think the issue, Christy, that we know that has come up is the ability of programs to provide appropriate supports there for children and youth who need those supports.
Yes.
So I think that's going to be very important. I know there also are families who would prefer for their children not to be included, but I think in having special camps like Special Olympics and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I also hear from a lot of families who would like to have their children have the opportunity to be included alongside their peers who are not identified as having special needs.
So Pat, what I mentioned that is, what I thought I heard you say was that somebody with an IEP or a 504 plan may not necessarily want to be part of the.
Most families that I interact with, and again, I don't want to speak for every family because I don't interact with every family in the last county has this child with an IFSC or IEP or 504 plan. But recommended practices would be that if we really believe in the tenets of inclusion and we're doing things for all children, then children who have special needs should be included alongside their peers who will have different kinds of special needs, I guess is the way I would phrase it.
So you're offering an opportunity if they choose to engage.
Yes, and there have been and historically are summer camps that are for children, for example, who have spina bifida, for example, or muscular dystrophy. We know about those things, right? Because they have special activities and things that are tailored to children who have certain types of delays or challenges.
So,
But I think we've heard a lot last summer, right, Christy, about children who were at summer camps and after school programs, where there was a strong request from the providers for both after school and summer to have some resources for how to support individuals. And that's a good way, I think, to partner with UF and other people in the community who have expertise in those.
So it'll be important then to include in the RFP, what's your current capacity to serve these kids, and are you open to supports from outside your program to make that local?
Yes, turns out under federal law, of course, children shouldn't be able to be excluded, so that's the other issue. You know,
Yeah,
that we're to be Americans with disabilities.
Yeah, so I think also too, like the children with different abilities and anyone who can have an IEP or 504, there's a broad spectrum.
Absolutely.
So, cause like really like children that are like gifted, I don't know, it's just kind of some kind of, not just children with like spina bifida or it could be. It's a whole. Yeah. So, but I do recall in the summer at that debriefing or the post-summer activities that there were some families, a couple said they had a good experience and some did. And I think we do want the families with children that have different abilities or whatever, to have some coverage for that. So that's Dr. again.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, does this sound like an opportunity for some kind of a meta program where, you know, if I'm running an after school program, I'm not really sure how to meet the needs of this child. Is there 1-800 help me out with this? And then the trust sends someone over that that informs those providers what they need to do and maybe gives them some special supplies or extra staff or who knows what. But I mean, I'm just seeing this being a little bit complicated for our providers and a good opportunity to try out this meta.
Yeah, and it turns out that the ELC for after school has individuals who are primarily focused on birth to 5, but they are also provide and could provide supports who have training in working with children with different abilities. So that's one potential resource, and then building upon that. So I don't want to dwell on it, but I think it's a huge and important issue, and it's how we front face our work. As when we say all children, we mean all children.
So Chris, we started something to add about that?
I did. So we started the conversation. I was able to attend this in February, the Disability Resource Fair. And so while there, making connections with different organizations who have the training and can offer training to our providers on how they can make sure children with different disabilities can be included in programming. So those conversations have started specifically for that reason.
Nothing here either about non-English speaking families when working with them.
Not English speaking.
Sorry.
All right, absolutely. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
And so the children who have IEPs and 504s all have to have some sort of a evaluation by a psychologist or a doctor before
We have to
getting
have
those.
a comprehensive interdisciplinary.
Because anecdotally, I'm hearing that is a real barrier right now.
It is.
Is that correct?
Yeah, had it for a long time.
Okay, good. I'm hearing correctly then. That's what I'm hearing correct. I just wanted to know.
There aren't enough school psychologists to go around.
So, which leads me to maybe that is something that the trust can compel with us. But I don't know. Go ahead.
But they're hard.
Moving on to the current minimum qualifications to bid. So the list you see here on this slide was created for those who were interested in applying. If I wanted to apply for these dollars, these are the things I needed to have in place. The staff intend to remove the summer provider requirement. We don't want that to be a requirement to apply for these dollars. What that indicates is that you must be currently funded as a summer camp provider to apply for our after school dollars, and we want that removed from the minimum qualifications to open it up to other after school providers in our area. We also would like to remove the validation in Philanthropy Hub as a requirement to bid and make that a deliverable. We think that's a great partnership with the Community Foundation. We want to remove it as a minimum to bid, but make it a deliverable, that if you are a provider, then you are a part of that philanthropy hub. Services 4 days a week, 1.5 hours a day is specifically for K through 8th grade. High school is very different. So we've already started having that conversation. And we've considered reducing requirements for after school, for high school students to a minimum of 2 days per week for 1.5 hours per day. High school students are normally participating in extracurricular activities, whether it is high school clubs or athletics or helping their parents with their younger siblings.
Chris, just a second, I think it's a better question.
4 days a week and 1.5 hours per day, 1.5 hours doesn't seem like very much.
It's a minimum.
And then
Mhm.
the minimum would be higher.
But it's right after school, right? 3 o'clock, but 3 till 5:30 is time.
Okay, so it's a
Like,
3:30.
2.5 hours.
But the school gets out at 3 to 4, and you have to have transportation to get there. 3 something, they may not be at a place that's 1.5 hours. Middle school gets out like 3 something.
And middle school gets up later, but they start later as well. So,
Right, but I'm saying that you got.
but I mean, should hours just isn't very long. I mean, that's 3.5, 5. You know, alternatives using this in lieu of something else. I mean, should it be 5 days a week and 2 hours? And then 2 hours? I mean, because if you're only offering 4 days, I'm throwing this out there. If it's only 4 days, then people have to think about something else to do. And, you know, if it's only 1.5 hours, then you have to think about something else to do. To me, it seems like it should be long, 5 and at least a minimum 2 hours, but.
So when we look at, and I'm not opposed to that at all, most parents need 5 days and until at least 5:30. When we look at funding after school programs and when we look at the Wallace Foundation and we're able to calculate, you know, the cost for children to be involved in after school, we looked at the minimum. What is the minimum? And the cost for that minimum. And when we look at our RFPs, and we're not quite finished with this part yet, but we can award dollars based on, at a minimum, you are able to provide this. You can propose more, which all of our after school programs are 5 days a week for at least an hour and a half a day. But this was just the minimum that we set. We are not opposed to asking for more with the understanding that it requires more dollars. But again, we've also had the conversation about how much of your budget we're funding also.
Well, I personally would recommend that it be 5 days a week and at least 2 hours a day, simply from the standpoint of we're looking for stability for the children. And if they're only open to a short period of time, and this may not be an issue with any of our providers, but the parent's gonna figure out, okay, well, it starts here, you know, he or she starts here and then goes somewhere else. And there's 1 day a week that we have to find something else for child to do. Yeah. I think from a consistency standpoint, it would be 5 and 2. Y'all can shout me down on that.
Well, I mean, I'm not gonna shout you down, but I would say this is the minimum. I would prefer it to be 5 to 2, but as a minimum for them to apply, I'm okay with 4 and 1.5. They may not win, they may not get the argument, they may not be the best provider, but
Preference given to providers in 5 to.
yeah, I mean, obviously.
So would that factor into whether or not y'all grant an award? It's the number of hours and days a week.
Yeah.
This is just the minimum.
I realize that, but if that doesn't mean our minimum can't be fixed.
So then it's an item you would score, and as you were saying, 5 and 3, you get more points than you were 4 and 1 and 2.
Yeah, the evaluation criteria of a response to the RFP could include that there are higher points. The range, you know, differs if it's the bare minimum or if you're going to be 5 days.
If we leave it at 4 and 1.5, then I would hope that y'all would put that in as criteria.
Yeah, I'd be in favor of that.
I'd be in favor of that as well.
We keep the minimum, but score higher for more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Top of mind, good?
Yeah, we can do that. With our high school age, after school, this is an opportunity for the board to talk about after school for, high school. What does that look like? What do you want to consider when funding that? Going back to the Wallace Foundation, they recommend if you're going to fund high school type programs that they focus on jobs, apprenticeship type programs that are offer events for youth to prepare for college or to prepare for postgraduate experience, career technical education. Those are the types of programming that's recommended versus an after-school program. And so earlier, I know we talked about specifically focusing on potentially K through 8th grade for after school. And does the board want to have a detailed conversation about exactly what it is you all want to focus on in that area?
So I think for me, the elementary, I think is different from middle and high. In the sense that at the middle and high, there are more activities after school that are being offered to children at the school, meaning athletics and clubs. And I don't want to penalize a program or a student if they have a student who is involved at things at their school intermittently, and then they come to the program. So I had children that were like that. They participated in sports and clubs that were offered at school. And then when that activity ended, they were at another organized program or after school where I paid for them to be. And so I think we have to make some concessions for that, because there are a couple programs that operate like that. They have children that are involved in track, basketball, football, and whatever. And then when there's downtime or between seasons, those children may slide into an after-school program. But you got to have staff. They can't not run a program to think that, for the kids that are there. And I don't think it's fair that we say to, make the children choose to be involved in extracurricular activities at school and not be involved in a community-based activity that would be after school is my thing. So I think we got to figure out some kind of compromise as an organization with the type of funding that we would give, because so there would be some balance there. Yes.
But the flip side of that, is that perhaps as an individual that could slide in that spot, they could use it all the time, as opposed to when, if somebody is not there a couple of days because they're doing something organized, there could be a child that could utilize those, all the time. So by having that person who's only going to be here sparingly, may deprive somebody of having that consistency that they need. That's not participating in everything else, and giving them an opportunity for something to do in the afternoon that the other child already has to a certain extent. But
I think for me, that's right. I mean, if I were thinking about developing that kind of program, I would be saying, okay, I want to have capacity to 20 kids, knowing that those 20, there may be 5 who come every day. So that at any given day, I might have 20, and 5 of them or 10 of them are the same kids every day, but others come and go. So that you don't say, I may have 30 kids enrolled, but only 20 a day. And that's the kind of thing that folks that do this, we need to rely on their expertise to know how many of those kids they're likely to have, so that they can say, okay, I'm going to budget for 20 kids a day, knowing 5 will be consistent all the time, and the rest will come and go depending on what after school activities they're involved in after school or somewhere else. And I think that's what we need to then look at. Well, did you actually have that many every day? Did you get to that many, or were they just not attending? Or did you calculate wrong? The other thing I'm wondering about is, and you probably know the answer to this, are a lot of the schools not being able to provide transportation to the kids that do want to participate in after school sports and bands and those kinds of
The
things?
district does not do that.
So I think another area for us to look at, is that we know transportation is a huge issue. And I think for some of those kids, it may be better for them to be engaged in something after school, after hours, if they were able to get some sort of support for transportation. So I think we need to to be creative about that. And then the third thing, I know there have been several convenings of youth in the community. That has asked them, what would you like in terms of things that you can do as opposed to what we adults think you might like to do. And I think we should make sure too that that gets taken into account when we design some of these or look at funding for certain programs is what are the kids in the community told us they really want after school, particularly the high school kids. They won't come if it's not something they're interested in. Or they'll disrupt.
Who has that info? I mean, I think I like the idea that part of the, you started.
I'm sure I did address one thing that Christine, and that was, what we want to focus on as far as high school. And I like the idea that we spend money, for, preparation for life, as opposed to, after school programming. So, I don't know how the other board members feel, but I certainly would encourage that.
Well, I guess.
I agree with that. I also want to say that with regard to literacy, the Board of County Commission and the school board passed a motion at last week. So I'm in favor of that as well. I think, coordinating with the school board with regard to that, and I think that leads right into after school programming for K through 5th grade that focuses on literacy. I am 100% behind. I think that's good. I'm fine with your two recommendations of them have to be a current CTAC summer provider that opens it up to providers and also with the foundation being that. I'm okay with that. Hopefully if they get funded, they sign up for that hub if they're not already in it, because if they didn't, I think that would not close well for the next year. Yeah, I want that hub to be a real resource for them. So,
My question about that was, I thought that the hub was what you were using to vet some of the qualifications, all information that has to be entered into the hub. That kind of put more work on you guys if they're not already in the hub.
No, we have been able to utilize the relationship that we created with the Community Foundation to assist providers in getting in that hub through, Barzella and Leslie. And so I don't think it required more work. We had Leslie and Barzella present to all of our providers at our training after they were awarded dollars to support that also. So I don't think it was that much more. And we do make it a deliverable so that it's not an option. If you are funded, it's one of your first deliverables.
I'm also, and lastly, I'm also in favor of what we talked about earlier, the tier funding, that they would be limited by their budget. That we don't have a provider that's got a $2 million budget that's asking for 30%. They're limited. Are y'all in favor of that?
Yeah.
You are? Okay. Well, so what the county says, just to remind, the county says if you got a budget greater than $1 million, you're limited to not more than 10% of your operating budget. If it's a small entity like 100,000 or less, or 200,000 or less, you can get up to 30%. But $200,000 budget, you can get up to 60,000, but not more than that. And in between, it was like 20%. Like 250 to $1 million, you couldn't get more than. Well, after that, but you could get more than. Okay. So essentially, what the idea behind that is that if the trust is funding significantly a new organization, and it's a priority of the trust, and they're funding a large percentage of that organization's budget, really the way to think about it is that should be a department of the trust. It's funding an entity, and it's,
They can move it now.
it should be right, and we don't probably do that, right? And so that's a way for the entity to say, okay, we've got to either combine with another entity or look at other resources, other funding.
I suppose there's a pilot program or something that comes and come to the board, comes to the staff and says, I've got this program, are y'all willing to fund it, say for the first year?
Yeah, I mean, for the prismatic report said that extra money off to the side would be used for that kind of stuff. I remember at the county commission, several years ago, we funded HIPPY. There's a brand new program and they, at least for us, and, but I think there will always be exceptions, but under the RFP.
Right.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about. I'm talking about like creators on.
They're established at that point, just on a certain.
Madam Chair, can we go back to you all talking specifically about high school? And is there something specifically we want to address for high school?
I would encourage, I would encourage life skills, teamwork, those types of things. I would have a higher preference. And when I think about after school, I'm thinking about kind of Addison's spreadsheet, which is if we could think about a third of those going to the little ones and two thirds going maybe, or there's organizations that could expand the services they provide. Right now, they only provide the 8th grade, but they could open up that to K through 8th grade. I think that would be a higher preference.
So for me, for the older students, I do think college and career, post-secondary is
Career exploration.
career exploration,
Job skills.
jobs, work, job skills. Yeah.
Is there anything else that we're not considering that should be considered?
No, yeah, that I had, the research I've done, you're hitting on all of those.
Safety, I'm always gonna go back to safety and, make sure, I don't think you mentioned it, but I'm sure you had in your notes to, ask in the RFA if they would accommodate a third party to come in and do some kind of overarching, age appropriate activity.
Yeah, when I think about life skills, I think about the soft skills and employers be telling us that they get applicants that don't have, and I think about conflict resolution and managing, managing those interactions effectively. Those are the kinds of overlays to any of these programs. Again, no one provider may do it all, but if you can get people to come in.
Addison, you have something, come to the podium. We can't talk. See here.
I just don't want to, when all the talk around gun violence, youth violence, I want to make sure that we keep that in mind because we've all been to way too many of those meetings recently. So I would not throw out teen centers. These are very effective. Those are drop-in programs, and I know that language was in the last one. I would recommend taking that language out for high schoolers or in general, but the point being is that please don't throw out teen centers because the number one response that I always hear, and I think that came out there, we have nothing to do. We need a safe, encouraging, positive place that teens can literally just show up to and be around supportive adults, caring adults. And then the services that you're talking about, pre-collegiate, all of that, that's where you build a relationship with them to get them into those types of programs or to recommend or to whatever, but please don't throw out teen centers. That is how our high school model is based upon, as I know it's YMCA's model is how they're going to be based upon, and it would hopefully encourage other teen centers to pop up. We need more of these places in different communities. We need engaging, fun places for them to go.
Could those services be in the teen centers as well?
They could, however, that's a big lift. So sometimes what I would recommend is let people do what they do best. If they can do it all, great. But starting off, it may just be a teen center. Then those other pieces, enrichment partners that the RFAs for those can come in and do that, or somebody separate. But I'm not saying just don't limit them into saying you have to do all 5 of these things just to open, right? Because there's a lot of great teen center examples all over the country that could apply for this funding if the qualifications were not as stringent.
Questions, we're going to still put there. If I could, you all talk about. Are those centers funded by the municipality and then the programming by a trust? Because we have to also figure out as a trust, what are we requiring of our partners, the city of Gainesville, the county commission, High Springs City Commission. You provide the center, you staff it, you have the resources. The trust then has a relationship with the nonprofit that can then make sure you get the person in there, because we can't fund everything.
No.
And so around the country, I'm asking you the question of how are those centers, the bricks and mortar funded?
When we were opening up our teen center for Oakview, we looked into a lot of these different models. Again, it's pretty diverse, but Yes, either the building was donated or the space, the facility, maybe the city, maybe not had staffing from it, but maybe they allowed them to use it. I think the Oakview was a perfect example. It was basically free rent and no utilities. And then, but then you have requirements, the city, then you have requirements that you have to do so much programming, right? So that was like your rent payment, right? So there's a lot of different models. I would say facility use would be huge for city and county. And even UF, and then the trust fund, the personnel, because the personnel is the most expensive piece to this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that was what I was gonna say. I was at the drop, no, because, these teen centers have got to be open outside of Monday through Friday. You know, they gotta be, there gotta be some weekend time, because that's what I'm hearing when I talk.
Weekend time.
It's gotta be where they stay safe, so they can go.
And then that may be a good RFA, is there an opportunity to do any weekend, time or activities? There's,
Midnight basketball is like an example, but it just can't just be like summer, it's gotta be like all.
in the world peace conversation regarding this age group, there's actually, there's mental health first aid for adults. There's youth mental health first aid for adults who work with youth. And there is now actually a teen mental health first aid that is designed for teens themselves rather than the people who work with them. And I think that's an area that is also really worth including in some research. It really teaches kids to understand mental health, stress management, how to cope and how to help others and how to be supported. So I think it's definitely worth, and it's now an evidence-based practice that's got research and data behind this. And I think
Dr. Carolyn Tucker was doing something like that.
she was, but it's a different program. This one's actually a version of the standard mental health first aid trainings and certification, but it's designed for teens.
So I think this thing where the no drop-ins, I think.
So I was gonna say it's a great segue into the next slide, because the next slide really kind of identify what work was not allowed. And with, either within this one RFP or after we identify those that we're gonna fund, it could be a separate RFP about potentially teen centers, how they collaborate with other providers, the programming that comes into that. I think it's a great opportunity to collaborate again with our local partners throughout the county. The cities have an area, but the trust is supporting the programming, or the staff or the meta, getting other folks to come in. That's definitely a way we could do that, because we have not done any type of drop-in for that type of program.
And that may be a separate RFP, but it's just of that, if that you have a teen center or something that is dropped in, maybe that's different from the actual facility.
Because I think that's important, because we would have to see how much, we have $1 million. And with a tiered approach, I think that helps. But we need to see, how much funding is left.
And then we probably also maybe, as a trust board, have a joint meeting with the city, since they have spaces and they have something. We've had, myself and I think, the ED got joint use agreement for something that's being done in Alabama, like how they're using facilities and all, to be in another state, I think it's Alabama. And then we kind of like start looking at that. I think we kind of talked about that with the county and the school board in a joint meeting last week, and looking if somebody didn't have to pay rent, the taxpayers have already funded bills.
Right.
Yeah. Like, let's figure out a way to be able to use this resource. And not just city of Gainesville or Washington County. I mean, even in the outline of the municipalities, they have buildings. I mean, and maybe they need some costs, there'll be some shared lifting here, because the trust can't fix all the problems that they provide some programming and all. We have the buildings there, and we figure out how to fund this.
You also have the League of City meetings that we've been involved in, where we could, once we, finalize our approach, we could then introduce these collaborations with them.
Like, I don't know, like you guys look at Brevard County and Pinellas County. I'm not sure about Hillsborough County. I have family that live in those two counties, and they have a lot more activities for their youth than what we have here in our county. And we've been
It was so fun, but a lot of people have been on for a while, so.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, you know, here we have like different streams of funding, but we still don't have a whole lot for our kids to do. And those communities do. And I'm just trying to figure out like, what are they doing differently from us? Where they're offering more things for their young people that have been for years, not just of late. I'm talking about like when my kids, and their cousins that live in those other two counties that have grown up. There's just been more opportunities. I've had to pay more out of pocket, but I've had it to do it. But there are a lot of families that don't. And so I think we just maybe start talking about that.
All right. On the next slide, it identifies just the type of information that we require from providers who are interested in applying for dollars for the after school RFP, all the necessary information as it relates to the site staffing. Then we require them upfront to identify the number of children, hours, descriptions, as well as budget information with our fiscal director now. So there will be additional fiscal information that we're interested in understanding about each provider, especially if we're going to move towards a tiered approach. We'll need more information as it relates to that. Data collection, demographics, consents for to share their information with the trust, image releases, attendance, as well as surveys, and all, of course, all providers have performance measures. So this presentation has additional information than you had that was released in the packet. So just the FYI, across all of our almost 60 programs, we have 550 performance measures, which are defined using our results-based accountability framework. So examining the quantity of efforts through our how much measures, the quality and engagement and services through our how well measures, and then short-term better off outcomes, such as improvements in knowledge, attitudes, behaviors, or circumstances. Every provider has at least one how much, how well, and better off performance measures, and most of them have 2 to 3 for each, and some maybe a little less. Similar to how each program is associated with goals and strategies, each performance measure is associated with one of the trust goals or 14 strategies. More than 2/3 of the performance measures are aligned with our educational goal area. Nearly half of performance measures are associated with strategy 2, and that's to expand access to high quality childcare, after school, and summer programming. And this includes performance measures associated with after school, summer programming, enrichment, accreditation academy, transformative, I'm saying that word wrong. I apologize. Professional development, TPD. I'll stop using the acronym so I can get the word out next time. And then when we think about how we are continuing to develop and improve upon our performance measures through our research, our program development, CQI, which we just introduced last month, and data management, will continue to improve and strengthen those performance measures. Among our current measures, 41% of the performance measures were continued from the previous fiscal year, and then 44% were revised, and then 15% are new, most of which are new contracts. But there are also some continuing contracts with new measures that have been added. With the after school RFP, the board does have to approve the minimum qualifications that we discussed, the evaluation criteria, which we discussed. We would have to recruit and train volunteers to serve on the review team. But we do bring all of that back to the board for approval before it is released. Once it is released, there is 4 to 5 weeks that we give providers so that they can be involved in bidder conferences that we have. We'll have 2 of them, in the morning and in the evening. We offer office hours for providers to come in to make sure they have all the necessary documentation. And then there's also a mechanism created for them to submit questions electronically during the cone of silence to ensure that all the providers have an opportunity to understand and get the guidance and the support that they need for any RFP that we release. The board did vote to make all bidders conferences or attending at least one mandatory. So that means, you know, if you don't attend a bidders conference, you cannot apply for the dollars. So just a reminder that the board did approve of that. So I'll stop here for any additional discussion or questions as it relates to.
I have one, Crystal. I'm wondering if we might want to think about for the after school RFP to allow for the providers to budget for some funding to support their participation in some type of a steering committee activities about our future direction around, you know, creating a boost-like entity. I've heard from some of the after-school providers that one of the challenges is getting to meetings, getting to, you know, having to have coverage when someone comes in, entity has to come to a meeting and things like that. And I just think there's a lot of requirements on them, but is there a way for us to build in the opportunity for them to budget to participate in some type of a network that eventually could be, you know, a Boost approved, Children's Trust approved provider, because I think they have the expertise to help us really realize all the things that we're talking about. I don't know if that resonates with some of the folks that we talked to and talked with, but right, I mean, that's what you all have said has been the biggest challenge is who's leading that network that's up providers, yeah, who has the time and the bandwidth. Am I misrepresenting what you all have talked about with us?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Board discussion.
No, I think the boost model, I think the trust should have a person to lead that. I think that model of what they bought of us having someone kind of a resident in-house person with the trust that can be part of the think tank, that after school investment network, the Weicker Institute, you know, can do those trainings and then can come back here, can be the representative for that. Because I think positive youth development, that's pretty much what the trust is about. I think if the trust could take ownership of that, that was why it didn't really get off the ground and get going. They did a lot of work initially, but they just didn't have the bandwidth and staff to be able to do that. So I think if the trust could you want to add that to you. I do think
But I think it's like it's almost like, if I could just say, if you have a grant and your part of the requirement is that you have to participate in these activities, you still have to have, it's like substitute pay in schools for professional development. I don't think the burden should be on them to have to pay for their travel here or even to release their staff or PD. I think there has to be some incentives for them to be able to budget for this. I think if the network's
I agree. Should the network be a part of the after school RFP though? Are you talking about maybe?
I'm talking about allowable budget expenses for them to be able to participate in that. Like,
Make the person allowed.
you need to be here today for 3 hours, right?
Yeah,
That's
okay,
3 hours.
that's not boost.
The work that they're doing.
well, I think I think it's both and.
Okay.
I think it's both and. It's not just the meeting here today. I think it is having a person and I know I heard my colleagues here say, one said you want an FTE, one said we already have enough people, but I do think we need some residents, some knowledge within the trust to be able to help coordinate the RFP activities, to help with like if we have a person inside the organization, they understand the continuation and the connection between all of the different things that impact you and to help you to coordinate that. I think right now as an organization, we're asking our providers to figure out and to crack the nut and to do all this extra stuff and just come to us and get more funding. And that may not be their cup of tea. They may just be willing to or able to.
Not everybody might want to do that, but some people who want to take a more active role in it, I think should have the opportunity to do that.
So I don't know if the more immediate thing is that we have a budget line item where they're getting funding, they're participating in that, and it's not a hardship financially, or then we just have the time investment and we help with that, and then we turn the curriculum on more expansive.
I think as we develop the strategic plan and we start to think about the kinds of initiatives we want to fund, part of the question is always, what do you need in-house to support that? And so I think rather than to say, well, this sounds like a good, I think what we need to say is, what are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish? Are we adding more contract? Are we adding more requirements? And then they require infrastructure wise for the trust to have, which could be FTE. And I think that's the approach that makes sense to me to fund that. But I would certainly consider it an allowable expense that they should be able to have coverage if they need it.
Yes, I think I can support that. Yes,
Can I just ask one question about this, this graph right here, which I think is very interesting, yeah. So when we say performance measures, sorry, it's covered up by the little bar up there, performance measures per goal. And we can see a lot of performance measures related to education, but not so many related to health support and safe. How can we have performance measures that our providers are accountable for if we don't have this meta programming to come in and drop it in? And then if we were, let's say we did what Nancy is begging for every meeting, and we had an RFA for health that kind of covered things, whose performance measure would it then be? Would it be the RFA person who got the money, or wouldn't it be interesting to go back to our original providers and say, what are you seeing? You know, now that we've dropped in on you and had a segment on safe or supportive or health, have you seen any change in your kids that reflects that was effective? So anyway, this is just food for thought. But I love it, Brad. This is very informative. Fine.
Yes, please, go ahead.
We've got the board going to Dr. Hart's comment. We've got performance measures here, and it says education. And there was, however many people, 379 responses or whatever. Would that not be the appropriate thing when we come up with something about literacy that we put on the in the RFP? What are you going to do as far as with, and how are you going to demonstrate that it either has improved or it hasn't gotten worse?
The performance measures change based on what the scope of our after-school program is for.
So that will actually be in the RFP this year, right? And that there are going to be performance measures required that you can demonstrate.
That would be, it's the same as, very similar to what Dr. Snyder, I'm sorry, Dr. Hart, if we change the scope of our program to meet a specific goal, then our performance measures is also, that is what we're looking for.
Okay, and then as far as what I heard today, it seemed like it should be imperative is that there needs to be recognition within whatever program that a child is being perhaps traumatized. So if that is the case, are we going to have something that you have taken a course that there's somebody on staff who recognizes is maybe not proficient, but at least they've taken some sort of something like they do, saying that they've taken a CPR course.
How does your program identify individuals that have been like a prescription of? I think we're going to need to probably help the providers with a lot of that type of training. And I think if we can gather information about how do they identify them, so that we can then provide them with resources.
Or maybe that's something in a class that we did, for the providers, it's going to be, I think that, I don't know, maybe too quick for this RFP process, but I think that's something that if we could, that would be a good thing. For anybody who's getting money from the trust, that there's recognition that you understand that this may be happening and can hopefully recognize.
Yeah, I think that's what we covered earlier, that we would have, they would agree to have a third party come in to provide.
But I mean, do it in this RFP for them to
Yeah.
provide for this one. this
Right,
time.
that's what, that was already agreed to do that.
Okay.
I don't wanna rush this along, but we may lose another board member here, we may lose another one in a few minutes, so.
They're all, you know, probably very happy to hear that.
No.
Yeah.
So along those lines, there are, and we think about the meta programming, we've already been looking into building relationships with providers that we have here, but also you have the Florida After School Network that offers, based on our membership, our providers can then participate in that. We can also include that in our agreements, that there will be programming, training opportunities throughout the year that you, as a recipient of these funds, you participate in those also.
You agree to participate.
You agree to
Yeah,
participate.
There's a pay them to have a release time for their staff.
And then there's,
So
yeah,
they need to be able to figure out what that budget for coverage, substitute, as needed staff is gonna be. So that we know that that's in the budget, and they have coverage to attend all of this stuff that we're gonna require.
so to try this.
You just said, I don't know that I necessarily agree with it, that somebody automatically gets paid just because they take time out of you're giving them, they are applying for money, we will be giving potential. Giving them, you know, financial assistance.
And it counts their costs.
It does update costs, sometimes you want, in order to get this, you know, there are certain things you have to do, and sometimes that require attending events.
Right, but that's part of that's built into their cost structure. So if if we're gonna cover their costs, we have to understand that that's part of their costs.
Still allowable cost.
So allow their costs.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm kind of agree that what I would like to know, is that if we make this a requirement, that at least somebody on their staff goes to this training, do they acknowledge that they have somebody that will attend one of those trainings?
Exactly.
And so it's part of their overhead allowable cost, but kind of leave that, you know, there's a requirement. Right, kind of like you have to be.
Yes, you got- How to do those things.
But she's trying to do it, but.
Before and Mr. Lee, if I could be a little clearer about what I was suggesting. I was suggesting that I think that we should incentivize participation to help us as part of the strategic plan. It's called a participatory approach. I think we have a lot to learn about. I think a lot of the after-school providers recognize when children have been traumatized. What Hart was saying, I think, was how to respond to it. Those are the kinds of things that I think we need to hear from the people that I've been listening to on the steering committee, Christy and others, about we need to incentivize their participation in this process.
So not.
Help us.
They need this help, they need that help. Yeah, they do, but they have a lot of lived experiences, wisdom and expertise, and we need to mine it and we need to incentivize it. That's where I'm thinking.
So if I can respond to Dr. Snyder, that she started talking about that, I'm gone, which I appreciate. Well, I think those providers that we know have that expertise, get with our staff, develop the programming or develop the types of how would we identify that across the system.
Right.
Yeah, and then we can put into the RFP, you have to do something with their input.
But we need to pay them for the time it takes to get that.
Of course.
That's all I was trying to think about is what's an interim way to do that in the current structure for those who want to step up, and maybe it's not the best way to do
Yeah,
it.
so keep in mind, this RFP is gonna come back to you in 2 weeks.
So the way we used to do that at my shop is if we have a staff member who was going to participate in a committee, we would add a stipend for their salary for participation in that committee. And so we could add a committee participation stipend to their contract for participation in our steering process or whatever we decide. It's just a flat out stipend. That way they can use that money for coverage. And Christy loves her heart and needs to drive the bus. She can
I was just thinking an interim solution to this network that is expertise that they don't have. However, we
So it sounds like that, I just heard, you can move us along, now going to the next part.
Yeah.
All right.
So, Madam Chair, I heard some concern about something that's gonna happen to, you know, the RFP is gonna come back. So are y'all asking for more concrete direction or?
Well, just with that particular item, I think we've heard clearly all of the other feedback that we were going to incorporate some of that. That needs time to be fleshed out and to put that in, right, for us to have to do that in 2 weeks, that's just not gonna happen, realistically.
Right.
So I will try to summarize what I have heard, for the after school RFP, and you can just stop me if I'm missing a point. We are, we're gonna keep the, let me get my thoughts. We're expanding, so that's a requirement. We don't just supplement funds. So everybody who applies will have to show us how they're either creating something new or expanding, K through 8. And then a separate RFP, potentially for, teen centers to address, needs for high school students more along the lines of, career exploration, apprenticeship, CTE, career technical education,
College prep.
college prep. Okay.
May I ask a question then?
Mhm.
That's gonna go into the teen center discussion? Okay, only because I thought that for that we might have, if there is RFP for career development or whatever for, you know, high school years, that y'all would allow that wasn't necessarily
Just for
part
the
of
team
the
event.
part for the teen center. So part of the RFP process could be, if a program comes forward that is for, life skills, that sort of thing, that can still happen, correct? Are you?
Yeah, I thought teen center was separate.
It's separate. All of that is separate.
Separate, and yeah, after school for, that could be, you know, high school, but the teen center is separate. It's a separate.
So no, that is not what, that's not my understanding of what we discussed.
No, I
So
thought the
be
teen
clear.
center was separate.
Teen center was separate, and there are or are not after school for high school.
They
There
are.
are.
But the focus on the vocational life.
Okay, so we're gonna have high school, after school programs and teen centers.
Right.
Perhaps the teen center is gonna be a discussion.
We can come back. Okay, we can come back for the teen center discussion. For now, just focus on the after school.
Okay, all right. But to clarify, there will be after school programs for high school students.
Yes.
All right. So we'll continue to address low income families for K through 12th grade for high school with a focus on literacy.
Yes,
We want.
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, okay, I just want to make sure.
And again, that can be meta.
Yeah.
Right.
I'll put my notes together. Consult with executive director.
I got you.
Well, the literacy thing, what you just said, Christy, is maybe a little bit concerning because there was a lot of educational stuff, you know, programs on here, but there may, you know, I don't want to potentially exclude a program that may not hone in on literacy. That I think that, you know, in every after school,
Could be high school completion.
you know, every high school program or every after school program, it would be great if there's a literacy component to it, but it could be just a component. So hopefully that, you know, that will be what we express is that if you're doing that, there will be some component of literacy to it.
And remember, we're gonna bring this back to you. So you're gonna get to eyeball this one more time, right?
Yeah.
Before it goes out.
Okay.
Okay. That concludes my presentation. I'll come to the podium.
Yes, I just want to ask if there can be public comment. I know there's a couple of things.
Yes.
That come up based off your discussion just now.
Okay.
So these are a few things that I don't think came up that have come up in the past, and I just wanted to remind you of it. One of them came a little earlier, technical system. I haven't heard in this discussion the kind of technical assistance that we provided earlier, and actually available at integrating systems. So are you all? So just because you talked about other kinds of technical assistance with, so just want to lose that thought. In terms of overlays, don't forget dental. And one of the reasons I say that is they have a local unit, they can go to these places and do screening. And other stuff too, they're getting into restorative care. While I'm looking at my notes, transportation. This has come up so many times, and again, I don't know that that goes into specifically your RFA, but it's something that we need to talk about. You all need to talk about. It's a need that came up big in the listening project. You all have talked about it a number of times. It's a huge barrier for lots of things. So, you know, perhaps it can be part of the RFA as a value add, and they provide transportation, and that's not just to, but from. You know, just an idea. Sometimes you get extra points for that. Another thing that's come up here a little bit, and it's come up in other settings, is business training for the providers in business practices. And I know you may think, oh, well, that's out there. Well, it's not very clearly out there. I mean, places provided, for example, there's some nonprofit training at the Community Foundation. We know that there's some entrepreneurship going on, but it really hasn't been consolidated and made easily accessible for providers. I think that's not necessarily part of this, but I think it's something that might be useful, perhaps in collaboration with city government or whatever, is having some kind of way for the providers to navigate that kind of training. You know, for them to be able to do a proposal, for them to be financially solvent or whatever. Oops, keep losing my page. Let's see.
Part of the science and nonprofit excellence.
Well, but again,
not everybody is involved in that, and not everybody can participate effectively in that. It's a discussion that we've.
and they don't necessarily do entrepreneurship either. They do business planning,
Yeah.
and some of, which is great, and board development. And it's not that, actually, I think probably nonprofit is the sector we should be going after in a lot of your contracting anyway, in my opinion. But then the other one that came up quite a bit, came up a lot with the navigation tour, and you all are funding it in some ways with resource centers, and that is navigation, having a way for people to access all the myriad of resources that there are. There's two aspects to that. One is having a central way to get current, credible information, and that's a big deal. We've been dealing with that a lot in the health sector. It's come up, oh, that's easy to do. It is not easy to do. There is some find help is one of the things that the health sector came up with is a number, but the problem with that information is not current and it's not personalized, so you have to feed it. But that's another thing that would be very helpful. The resource centers, that would be an excellent thing for them to be able to plug and perhaps even to feed into as an overlay. You know, maybe they come and visit, you know, once a month at the after school programs or whatever, to be there for the parents and say, hey, you know, let me hear a couple of things. I mean, we know that that's a problem across the board. So I'm sorry to check these off, but it's just things that I know that. Okay, I think that's it. Transportation, navigation, dental, business, training for providers of business. Thank you.
Any other citizen input before we?
Years ago, in middle school, we were asked to come in and just check out the behavior problems of the kids. And so we suggested that we do like a semester-long training for the kids. And So that involved all of the social emotional skills and a lot of play, just a whole delicious soup of all different things that they can be involved in. And it turned out that the kids that were recommended or ordered to do this program were the ones that were the biggest troublemakers. And so from that experience and watching the transformation, we called it a leadership training. And they were like, how could they be invited to a leadership training? They couldn't believe it. And the truth of the matter is it takes a lot of guts to do some of the things that for bad kids or kids that get in trouble do. I'd be terrified. I wouldn't steal from give someone a flat tire or whatever. I thought, so we treated them as they were leaders and it was very successful until the principal was moved on to somewhere else. And then that's a problem that happens in this community, in every community. All of a sudden, the people that have power to do something sometimes get relieved of it or move on, and then you have to start all over again. So that's just one thing that I think when we're talking about the after school program, if we could start a 360 leadership program where specific kids are invited in to these kinds of conversations where their voices are heard. The idea about trauma and recognizing it, the way that we look at it is that any adverse behavior, whether it's being quiet and shrinking in a room, or just being loud and boisterous, or doing something that we would ordinarily say is bad, they need punishment, take them out. We don't look at it like that. We look at it like there's underlying issues for all of them. And I think if we can change our own hearts and minds when we see this type of behavior, we address it in a way that has empathy, care, understanding, possibility of like something clicking. It almost always does. It doesn't always. There are kids that and adults that are so deep that it will take so much more, but it can be prevented. And so I would also suggest if we do a teen center, or if we don't do a teen center, but we do have an after-school program that brings in the joy of life at the same time, digs deep into the issues in circle where you feel you're embraced by others that have your issues and that you're seen for who you are and the potential that lies in all of us, because every single one of us is breathing the beautiful air that comes from this universe. It's a mystery. We don't know where it comes from. We call it different things, all of us, different religions. I heard that. That was the bell.
Okay, I'm gonna do it one more time. Sorry. Thank you, Turba. Addison left me a couple of documents for anybody who doesn't know about Boost. There's a timeline and there's just a little bit of summary. So I'm going to give these to Marsha. If anybody is interested in that. And just with the fear of being repetitive, I think one thing is really important, and again, I'm in the out of school time space, so I don't think this is something you put off. I think this is something that we need right now, and I think the early childhood people can understand this. There's a science of youth development, positive youth development. We don't have that, and I just said this, I know, but I want to emphasize it. We don't have that expertise here. It's nobody's fault. We just don't have it. But nationally, it's out there. I really think that we can benefit by not just staying in Florida, but there's a whole world of youth development consultant out there that can help us with systems. And so this isn't long-term, I mean, it's long-term, plus it's short-term. I really think we need to explore Forum for Youth Investment. That's the Weichert Center is under that umbrella. But I really highly encourage us to do that because they can give us guidance and a path and show what other people have done around the country. They have that expertise that we're lacking. So I really, really encourage you to seriously consider that. Yes, it's an investment of money, but I think it would be very beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, it's Glenn Over. My name is Jeff Parker with IGB Education. I have a clarifying question. I listened to most of the meeting on the YouTube broadcast. When will the RFP is gonna be refined now, obviously, but will there be an opportunity for new organizations to apply for after-school funding for this coming school year?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't need to say anything else. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Christiane, Girls Place. So further clarity, there is not a staff recommendation for a year.
The board came back and said 6 months.
Okay, I thought the 6 months was for the green highlighted.
It is. Sorry, not
So
for,
after-
not for after school. After school will be an RP
Okay,
that would be for the next year.
okay, I believe. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I think that was the confusing factor.
All right.
Madam Chair,
Give me a chance, give me a chance. All right. So I think the staff is good with the after school and all that. I
Yeah.
was gonna direct my attention
Yeah.
to this. That was what I see.
Well, thanks to Margo who's sitting in for Bob, we cannot vote.
Correct. Can't vote today. No.
But, just wanted to, share with you all the, wonderful visit that Maggie and I had last week. At the property, you all have a copy of the specs. I'm gonna be, working with Perry to put together, some kind of a short-term agreement so that we can gather more information and hold it. And we'll be bringing that to you at your next meeting.
The building is really in great shape. Internally, it looks really beautiful. It's about twice the size of what we need. And so one of the questions that we've had actually for Bob, and I don't know if Margaret can answer it, is whether or not under the rules of the trust, we could lease that unnecessary space to somebody else.
Unneeded.
Whatever, yeah. I think that we want to do that. So it's really.
Where do we put the youth center?
Eventually, it's it's configured for offices, it's an accounting firm, but it is really beautiful. We know the HVAC is new, we were checking on the roof.
The roof, he said, from whatever he was able to pull, I guess thank you, you can't tell. So we expect that we probably would have to put a roof on it in 3 to 5.
But the building is, like I said, inside is beautiful. It would need some minimal renovation to make the current conference room big enough to accommodate these meetings. But it's really all internal walls that are not load bearing, we don't think, from where they are. So it was really a really nice space. So we'll just wait and see, but it was good. The other building we visited was
Not so good.
and not so good.
Yeah. And then, Madam Chair and I had a brief discussion with, the county, when we were trying to put together our agenda for, your meeting, which is next Monday at 4, at the Health Department, about potentially would they have any, space for us, but it sounds like their plan, incorporates, the next 3 to 5 years. So it doesn't sound like there would be any space available for us in the short term to maybe go in under their
some
plan.
growth even with that other half, even if we lease out the other half. This will allow for some growth of staff.
I will add one other, someone did recommend to me, and I have not, of course, this literally came in Thursday or Friday of last week, that I might want to reach out to the city as they are looking at potentially needing some funds, and that there may be some properties that they might be willing to, to sell. And so I do plan to reach out to the city manager just to see if there might be anything available from them as well. So more to come. Madam Chair.
Thank you for that update.
Thank you.
All right, I don't have anything else on our agenda anymore. Any other comments or questions for the items that we've spoken about today? We have our joint meeting with the Board of County Commissioners on Monday at the Health Department at 4. You may or may not be able to.
appointment in Sanford, if I can get out of it, I'll be back in time, I won't be back, if I can't get out of there.
We won't be back. Okay, so if you're not there, we won't be alarmed. We'll just go.
I would expect you to do that anyway, yeah.
No, I mean, but you know, like the judge wasn't here earlier, so we're trying to later. Thank you all for coming. I think we had a good discussion. Thank you to the citizens who took out time to come and speak with us on the left. We appreciate your input and thank staff for the work that they did to prepare for today and the presentations. Barbara, thank you. Filling in. All right, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.